Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. We are here. We are here at a time on a day with some things. And that's very specific, I know. But for those of you that couldn't derive any meaning out of what I just said, Kevin of Engineering Politics and I are here on our 11th episode of Revisiting the Road to Serfdom, going through F.A. Hayek's seminal work, just laying out totalitarianism and collectivism and how all collectivism basically leads to totalitarianism, and trying to figure out how we can map that book that he wrote. It was officially published in 1944, but I guess inception of it was probably maybe even 15 years prior to that. But how we can map Hayek's thoughts onto today's context. And this chapter is one that, I don't know if we'll even be able to get through all of it today. I hope we will. But that, we go back and multiple times, Kevin, you can certainly speak to this, of just like, we get to these moments and we're like, how crazy is this that he was able to call this or explain this thing? It's always, whenever you're thinking about something or perceiving something and someone puts words to it, you go and you're like, yes, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. That's it right there. It's really meaningful. And Hayek is able to do that with so many different aspects of our current culture and where we're at socially, and politically, and so on. And this chapter, to me, is, there are moments like that throughout all of these chapters. But this chapter, to me, has the most that you're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Like, this is, and we'll get into this later about how there's parts where it's like, I don't even know how to distill this down. I don't know how to summarize this, because there's no way to do that without diluting the message and the truth there. So the chapter we're going over today is like I said, chapter 11, which it's called The End of Truth. And I think it's no coincidence that chapter 11 is also bankruptcy, in the legal sense. And, the idea that we're in an intellectually and morally bankrupt, society today, and that whenever you get rid of truth, that's how that happens, where you're at a place where you're morally chapter 11, I think is no coincidence. But that's my brief introduction there. Kevin, is there anything else you add? Today's been a day. A lot of it's my fault of even just delaying getting started. I locked the keys in the truck that I was driving up here in Bozeman, and I ended up having to walk 6 miles, a little over actually, to get back here and delay this. But here we are. So I don't know. It feels like this is going to be a somewhat loose, but hopefully as in depth as we can kind of conversation. I don't know. How are you feeling right now, buddy? What are you thinking?
Well, I think
how you doing?
You hit on some key points there that keep coming up for every chapter. One, this chapter where we're going to cite some bulk paragraphs, something we haven't done much in the past, but you said it's like you don't want to miss any of these key details. To me, it's like you can paraphrase Shakespeare, or better yet, just read Shakespeare if you want to get the whole, context of how he writes and the beauty in what he writes. And it's kind of the same with Hayek in a lot of these parts. Like, sometimes you just have to quote the whole paragraph, because there is no better way to paraphrase what he's saying. And like you said, you feel really vindicated. And it's like, we've talked about a lot of these ideas before. I think there's some stuff in here. We talked about one of our first conversations, which is about the Overton window, or the asymmetry of the Overton window. I think he touches a lot here. So it's like, someone as brilliant as Hayek can say you were right, except for, it was 1944. It makes you feel a little bit better, right? It feels
Sure.
like, oh wow, we were actually onto something. We're not just talking and listening to our faces make noise. It's important to know that you're making connections with people who saw these trends in the past. And I think that was a large message that he tried to convey in this book. He started out by saying Nazi Germany didn't end up as Nazi Germany because the Germans are German. It happened because there was a slow, gradual trend toward this. We need to recognize it before we repeat those mistakes. And too often today, and he hits on this toward the end, too often today do we think, well, maybe they had some ideas, not Nazis specifically, but certainly with the communists and socialists and stuff like that. Maybe they had ideas that were really good, but as we read about in the last chapter, chapter 10, which is how the worst get on top, those ideas fell apart because bad people took over. It was just the bad people. It wasn't the system. It's just the people. So let's, repeat some of those steps and go into this with no humility, no respect for what people learned in the past. And let's just do it all over again, see what happens. Yeah. And then we get surprised when we end up in the same exact spot. The horrible people get on top. And it's like, well, maybe people who, wrote during the time, 44, he's writing this throughout World War II. We talked about the courage you have to write this because you kind of don't know how it's going to shake out in the end. There was certainly some uncertain times during World War II where if you're, if you're in, the UK, if you're in Britain, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be speaking German in 10 years or what's going to happen. And if I write a book coming out saying the Germans had a bad ideology, how does it look on me? How quickly can I get out of this country and go somewhere else? Right. Yeah. So I think you hit on some important details there. And, this chapter, I think much like that last chapter, just has so much in there that is so relevant today. And, we're repeating a lot of the themes today that we were doing back then, or that other countries were doing back then. And that's why it's so important to repeat and revisit this material. We call it revisiting the road to serfdom. We need to revisit some of the trends that happened back then to see, to make sense, to frame what we're seeing today, and identifying it's how you fight it. And so I think that's really what we're trying to do today.
Yeah. Before you get into the summary of the last chapter, you mentioned Shakespeare. Did you see that the thing with Romeo and Juliet in that play where they had to hand out the disclaimers and stuff to people beforehand? Did you see this?
No.
I saw this thing on Twitter last night where someone went and saw Romeo and Juliet. I don't remember what city it was in. They're all the same these days, or for the most part. And they had to hand out a thing to people ahead of time where it was like, Juliet does not actually kill herself. Like literally it was this, this might be traumatic for people thinking about suicide and violence. These actors don't actually die. They didn't actually kill themselves. And then also between every single scene, they would go into this monologue about patriarchy and women's rights and stuff. And this was written 400 years ago, and the tweet was like, how stupid are people? They're literally telling people, hey, don't worry, you didn't just witness a public suicide. Seriously, yeah. It was that bad. So
reminds me of a Snow White where they got to say he did not get consent before he kissed her.
Yep, it's true.
So let's be careful, tread lightly when we repeat these old stories. It's much better.
Cancel Prince. What was his name? Prince, whatever, William.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who cares? Whatever. It's all the same.
Right. Yeah.
Cancel Prince.
Whoa.
Purple
Too soon.
What was last chapter, Kevin? Speaking.
Right. Yeah. Last chapter. So, for those of you following along, we're doing, basically a chapter a week now, chapter an episode. We started out being able to do a couple per episode, but we actually did something special last time where we got to do a live kind of Q&A, and we got to talk about everything live, where
we answered so many questions. Thank you guys.
Yeah, we did. It was a little bit of a scramble last second to do the live stream, but we did get to talk about all the material that we covered in chapters 1 through 10. So check that out if you haven't already. So you have to go back 2 episodes to go to chapter 10, which is why the worst get on top. I already talked about it a little bit already, but just to review that real quickly. One of the main points that we got while reading The Worst Get on Top is that many people believe that failed governments is a result of bad people coming to power. They don't believe that the problem is with the system, but rather they believe that any system can really work if managed by good people. But as Lord Acton alluded to at the beginning of that chapter, that it's a concentration of power a system gathers that corrupts the good people and attracts the bad people.
What's the Acton quote? You want to give the Acton quote really fast for people? Everyone knows it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we got to stop thinking that it's the good people. If there's good people who are in the system, good people running, it's the real socialism hasn't been tried line, because they always claim bad people took over too early. No, it is, we asked everyone while we were going through that chapter to keep asking yourself, why do the worst get on top? And your answer becomes more clear every single time we move further in the chapter. And I said, by the end, you're asking yourself, why wouldn't the worst get on top? Because it's just the natural conclusion to the progression of a lot of these systems that either, like I said, that they concentrate power here. And when you concentrate power, I mean, that is the absolute power corrupts absolutely.
I think it was power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, yeah.
Anyway. But
sorry.
Yeah, no, good clarification. So the next part that we saw in there, and something I'm actually going to bring up to today, is the difference between the moral basis and the moral results. That goals are not the same as outcomes. So what they do is they'll use this moral basis. They'll say it is immoral to have poor people. Okay, therefore we must redistribute wealth. And then the results, the moral results, is now everyone is more poor because you've screwed up this incentive system. You got rid of the free markets. Now people don't have as much choice. They're not as involved, or they don't want to be as involved in their work, which just leads to, it sinks all ships rather than raises the ships that were, sinking to the bottom. And they claim that, it's, since we had a moral basis for this, we can justify the immoral results. And that's something that we'll see continue throughout this chapter. The theme will be continued throughout here. The third thing that we pointed out is collectivism inevitably becomes particularist. So all collectivist movements need something to rally behind. So that's where the particularist element comes in. He talks about, race back then. So the Nazis, they were particular about race, ethnicity, nationalism. These are the things they became very particular about. And that is something, this particularism is something that's typically, at least as we see it now, is a grievance toward another group that is giving the group that is in power moral justification to harm the group and do horrible things to the other group. So you see Jews in Germany, you can see it today, that the grievances, the oppression, they're saying, these oppressed classes give them, the right to oppress others effectively, or they're not oppressing others, but it gives us the right, the people in power, the right to oppress others and create, real
name of equality.
Exactly. So it's normally this resentment pointed at another group that allows them to gain power by saying we ought to hurt them because they've been oppressing you for so long. And then the fourth point is the worst get on top when the ends justify the means becomes the supreme rule. So we talked a lot about the phrase ends justify the means, which is, an immoral rule for people who believe in, free markets and freedom and liberty and individualism. But it is the supreme rule for those people who advocate for planning. They must use any means necessary to get to their ends, because when you plan, you have to fix the ends to make sure you can get there. And you begin to understand that not everyone has to be given the same stuff at the beginning in order to reach a similar or same conclusion. And that's where you justify doing really, really horrible things to people who you see as that they would end up finishing on top. It's a backwards way of thinking. It's something that we see very common in a lot of these collectivist movements that move to totalitarianism.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. We're actually going to, at the very beginning, talk about the ends and means kind of system and how that works, particularly when it comes to the production and distribution of a manufactured truth. But no, that's exactly right. So
excellent. So we're in chapter 11 now, the end of truth. Already there, you can tell that the title, like I always say, I love the way that these are titled for the most part. This one is already something on our radar, and we, just like the last chapter, we actually related a lot of this to Eric Hoffer's The True Believer book, because there's a lot of similarities between here, and they have a lot of the same foundings. Also, when was Hoffer's book written again?
Hoffer's book was written in 55, I think. And also, does it almost feel like the chapter 10 is asking a question and chapter 11 is the answer? Why do the worst get on top? The end of truth.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I don't know, but I think Hoffer, I think The True Believer was 55 or 54.
Yeah.
You know what? Actually, I think it might have been 53. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So he like all the other chapters, he opens up with a quote. So the quote is from E.H. Carr, and it is, quote, "It is significant that the nationalization of thought has proceeded everywhere pari passu," which just means at the same time with the nationalization of industry. To me, this kind of reminds me of the the chapter in economics where we're going to limit everything to the economic sphere and it's not going to bleed into your life
Yep.
anywhere else. Well, no, you know, you nationalize industry. Very shortly after that, you're going to nationalize thought, if you will, because if you try to plan things where everyone has equal outcomes, you can't just limit that to economics because we're not machines. You know, if we are computers, then sure, you could reprogram us and allow us to end up in the same place, but we're not. We're also social creatures. We have thoughts, we have ideas, we exchange with each other, and normally the people with the better ideas end up on top very often in a free market of ideas, if you will. You know, when you nationalize something, if you're going to take this one sphere and say, all right, this is the government's job to provide you the security, that authoritarianism, that coercive power is going to bleed over into everything else eventually.
Yeah. So first off, I was super close. It was 51. So none of the numbers I said were right, except for the 50. But yeah, so 51. And before I get into this first quote, as often as the case, Hayek is laying a case and building a foundation of an argument and giving, you know, kind of a lot of times what Hayek will do is in a roundabout way make a claim, then spend a lot of time filling in like the why and the evidence of that claim, and at the end he'll put a fine point on that claim. And this chapter feels very much where he's laying out the necessity of why there is a need to manipulate truth, why there is a need to use propaganda to universalize truth and facts and theory and whatever. We'll get into what that means specifically here in a minute. And then the consequences of what happens when you do that, and then fleshing that out. But he does a good job of explaining why you have to do that. And so here's this first quote, and we'll see how I think we're going to get into some good exposition of the why here. But he says, although in a planned society, the beliefs must be chosen for the people and imposed upon them, they must become their beliefs. So those beliefs must become the people's beliefs. A generally accepted creed, which makes the individuals as far as possible act spontaneously in the way the planner wants. The skillful propagandist then has power to mold their mind in any direction they choose. And even the most intelligent and independent people cannot entirely escape that influence if they are long isolated from all other sources of information. So what he's saying here is, you know, one of the themes that we've walked through a lot in this book, and is that planning, which, you know, collectivism, whatever, and we've given our definitions. Planning is basically just think top-down bureaucracy, controlled society. If we even use the word liberal, I don't know if we do in this chapter or not, but liberalism, if we end up, that's like classical liberalism. It's, you know, think modern conservatism or libertarianism. But planning operates under, you know, what Hayek calls the fatal flaw of planning. And that is, you have these people who want to control society for some, you know, contrived, maybe authentic, probably not, morally virtuous means or morally virtuous ends. And they think everyone will agree with them. And so they'll use vague terminology like the common good, the common welfare, the greater good, whatever, justice, social justice. And then once they get into the specifics of what they mean by that, people are like, whoa, I don't know if we're on board with that. I think the example he gives earlier is this. It's like if a bunch of people agreed to take a trip, but they didn't decide where they were going to go. And what you end up with is most of the people who are going on that trip end up in a place they never signed up to be. Just because they initially signed up for the trip based on really vague, you know, rhetoric of the greater good or something like that. And so what Hayek is expanding on here is the point that it's not good enough if you want this to be sustainable, or as sustainable as something like this can be. If you look at North Korea, it can actually be very sustainable. But if you want it to be sustainable, you can't be satisfied at this surface level of propaganda or persuasion of them just agreeing to some kind of vague notions, you know, or vague, you know, outline of the greater good. You have to get them on board with all the aspects of it. And they also need to be able to spontaneously generate the thoughts that underline like that thing. And so it's almost like Inception. Like it's not good enough to just persuade people or coerce them to go along with it. They need to do it even without, once the overt mechanisms of coercion, or including like violence or whatever, are removed. They need to think that this is their idea, this is what they want to do. And so one of the things that he addresses at the very beginning is that one of the things that you might see, or that he encountered in terms of arguments against him, was like, well, advertising agencies use propaganda. And because Hayek is saying, look, the propagandist uses propaganda to get people not just on board with the vague stuff, but also with the specifics and the means. And we'll get into that here in a minute. But people would say, I mean, anyone who's watched Mad Men, Don Draper, right? Like, this is all about the propaganda of the advertising industry. Of course, this is, that's a much later in the timeline than World War II. But the point is, Hayek says, look, if you have competing propaganda, that's not the same. Coke versus Pepsi is not the same, right? Because those are competing ideas. Those are competing products, and people can choose. People, at least, that's a way. It's like, whose propaganda is better? What Hayek is saying here is that what a planned society includes is everything is the same propaganda towards the same end. And so he's like, they have to be isolated. This is what he says. I mean, to read it again, independent people cannot, even intelligent and independent people can't entirely escape that influence if they're long isolated from all other sources of information. So if you have competing propaganda, you have competing sources of information. In a planned society, you have one source of information. That's this hegemony, right? So even if you look at how we are today, and I know we're going to get into some of this later in much more detail, but we have a hegemonic society of information today, right? All of these institutions agree with each other. And so there's no competing information. This is one of the places where I think that Ben Shapiro or PragerU or whatever is actually really useful. Is that, I don't think they're useful in real practical terms, for people who already understand what's going on. But if you're someone who just like kind of red pills, for lack of a better term, and you're like, what is going on? And you're starting to fight those default settings, as Bridget Fedesi talks about. The default settings is, you're born into society, and unless your family is conservative or something like that, everything tells you, your family tells you, the entertainment tells you, school tells you, everything that the Democrats do is good for the most part, or that the left does is good, and then the right are the bad guys. And so once you start to awaken to that, get woke, so to speak, you're like, wait a second. So all of these perspectives I have, I've been isolated from all other sources of information, all other perspectives on these issues. What is the other side of that? And so that's where I think like Ben Shapiro, PragerU, even Steven Crowder has some good videos where people can go, oh, there's another side of gun control. There's another side of crime statistics. There's another side of economics or the welfare state or whatever. And so those are really useful in providing people with, another source of information, whereas they've been isolated from those sources of information. But that's kind of the groundwork that Hayek lays here, is that he gets into, it's not just good enough to get them on board with a vague thing. You have to get them on board with everything. So that includes whatever means you propose, all the ethics, all the morals, everything. And there cannot be competing sources of information, whether those be practical or ethical source of information.
Yeah. Something I often say, especially when people say, "Oh man, this movie failed," they're like, "Why did this movie do so bad?" And a lot of times, the movie has fiction in it, or let's say a movie that replaced an all male cast with all female cast. They say, "Why did it perform so poorly?" My answer typically is, even for a movie that's completely fiction, cartoon, whatever it needs to be, completely fiction, there has to be some part of truth in there to make it believable, to have the person buy in. When something's completely fiction and there's no tether to truth, the movie's just not good, because it doesn't come together properly. If you're going to replace an all male cast, all female cast, and they act just like the men do, even for someone who's super woke, they see that and they're like, there's something not quite right here. I don't believe they would act this way. You're not making me believe that this character you made up would truly make this decision here or act this way here, I don't think the movie's good because I'm not buying into it. That requires, so when we see that requires some baseline of truth. You have to know truth before you establish that relationship. What they do here with this type of propaganda is they isolate the truth and they send it out. They don't allow it to come inside. So there is no baseline these people can jump onto. That is why you can form alternative realities effectively. This is why LeBron James can say a black guy can't worry about stepping outside his front door without getting shot by a cop, when we have, FBI data here that says that's not right. That's not even close to being right. But he can say that, and it's pushed by the media because they isolate out the truth. They're not going to, show the war on cops or any of this stuff, any alternative narratives, or even if you say competing propaganda, they're not going to show that. They're going to completely shut it out. They're going to suppress it. Something we'll get into later. They're going to suppress it. And there is no baseline that the average person can establish to see if this particular set of facts, let's say, line up with reality, because their reality has been completely basically terraformed. And now they have nothing to compare it to. They have no baseline there. So I think this is a little bit of what he's getting into.
It's not good enough to just lie to someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you lie to someone, but they still have the truth available to them, then they can determine whether or not you're lying.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly like you said, they have to be isolated from the truth. There is my cousin knew a girl, I think I might have told you this once, who her parents successfully convinced her about the existence of Santa Claus until she was like 15 or 16. Like, it was that long. Because right.
I know younger audiences.
Right. Hey, I just saw Heat. There's an old Jim Gaffigan reference for it. So, but one of the ways they did that is they made sure that no cousin, no friend, anyone, no parent told her that we don't believe in Santa Claus. So she was completely isolated from an alternative perspective. She was like, I mean, I guess, and it was that long. And her parents were still pissed whenever someone finally told her, like, this is immoral. Like, it's like, you can't go full Andy Kaufman with your kids. Like, you're going to totally screw them up. They're going to be like, okay, wait a second. So is Asia real? Is that a real place? Like, if they're going to get to a point where it's like, wait a second, hold on, gravity.
Question everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, but that's the point, is it's not good enough to just lie to someone, because then they still have the competing narratives. You have to isolate them from the truth. And so then it's like, you can tell them whatever you want.
And as we'll get to in a little bit, I mean, what happens when you suspect a lie? You go to the Google machine, you type something in, the first results are CNN, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post. How far do you get down the list before you get someone who might give you an alternative view on this?
This YouTube channel.
Digging. Exactly.
Or,
Subscribe. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Well, no, do it. But it's hard to find truth. And that's the whole point, is you end truth by digging it so deep into the ground that no one can ever find it anymore.
Well, and that's the Brandolini's law, right? Brandolini's law is that for every lie out there, it's kind of an extrapolation on a lie makes its way around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. Brandolini's law is that for every lie, it requires an order of magnitude more truth to debunk that lie. So if you have a lie that's a sentence, you need a paragraph of truth. If you have a lie that's a paragraph, you need a chapter of truth. If you have a chapter of truth or a chapter of a lie, you need a whole book of truth. And then, but what happens if you have a volume of books of lies, right? Like, and so we're so inundated with lies. It's like, even just trying to explain to someone why a very simple thing, and we'll get into some of the contemporary context stuff, I'm sure, later, but where it's like the amount of time required is like so overwhelming. And that's just to even get them to go, okay, maybe on that one thing. And then there's like 14 things connected to it. And then it's like, okay, how much time do you have? Right. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we're going to get in the next section, which goes through kind of building a moral code, which I think this, is super important, because it's not exactly, they don't build this anti-moral, framework. That's, again, there has to be some truth in there, and they have to make you believe that you've believed this the whole time.
Yep.
So he gets into it here, quote, if its object were merely to teach people a definite and comprehensive moral code, the problem would be solely whether this moral code is good or bad. We have seen that the moral code of totalitarian society is not likely to appeal to us, that even the striving for equality by means of a directed economy can result only in an officially enforced inequality. Talked about this before, an authoritarian determination of status of each individual in a new hierarchical order, and that most of the humanitarian elements of our morals, the respect for human life, for the weak, and for the individual generally, will disappear. However repellent this may be to most people, and though it involves a change in moral standards, it is not necessarily entirely anti-moral. They are destructive of all morals because they undermine one of the foundations of all morals, the sense of and the respect for truth. That you have to eliminate truth here, and you can build a moral framework that makes sense to most people. So to me, this kind of reminds me of the last chapter, that I talked about in the brief summary, referring to the moral basis and moral results, except for this further explains that transition period between the two, that there must be a moral code change in order to convince the populace that the moral basis and moral results are interchangeable, that they're the same thing, and that truth is an obstacle in that transition period. So you cannot build these moral standards and just completely lie and just say, okay, we're going to believe up is down, left is right, black is white. You can't just go in there and say, okay, we're believing the exact opposite of what you believed before. You have to make them believe and move the goalposts a little bit using several different institutions, something we'll get into later, and make them believe. Like any good salesman will pitch something to you, and they're going to try to make you believe that you came up with the idea to buy this thing. They brought you in, but a good salesman can convince you that you came up with the idea to get this thing, or you're going to come up with different ideas as how you can use this item or service. That is what they're doing here. They're trying to give you these new moral standards and make you believe you believed in this the whole time, right? And that's extremely important to making that sure that gets ingrained in your culture, gets ingrained in how you operate. So when they do have these immoral results, you're not going to bat an eye. You're going to be like, oh yeah, we're looking for that the whole time.
Yep. So here's a question. I know this wasn't originally in the notes, but I think that he just made a really huge assertion. Mm-hmm. And all of our discussion from here is engaging in that assertion. And so we I think at least need to pay a little bit of attention to it. So whenever he says that all morals, or one of the foundations of all morals, is the sense and respect of truth, let's at least address why is a sense of truth and a respect for truth the foundation of all morals, of every, and if we're going to say morals is that which is good, virtuous, right in some kind of, I don't know, ontological sense is right, but philosophical sense is right. Why is truth so necessary and vital to the point of it being a foundation in all morals?
I think truth has a lot to do with the measuring stick you use to see if an outcome or result is moral or immoral. You have to know the truth about that outcome in order to establish or measure to see, what that result actually is. And if you can hide that truth, if you can say, we had the war on poverty, and then hide the truth that poverty just gets worse, and the reliance on government just gets worse as you are at the front lines of that war on poverty, it makes it easier to sell it because you have that moral basis, that moral foundation to be like, well, we want to fight truth, that's moral, and the actual moral results are something where it's going to hide and say, if you keep giving us power, we're going to keep making it better, even though it's just the trends showing it's getting worse. That's the truth. The untruth here is, well, it will get better if you give us more power and we can do these things more effectively. So I think truth is it's the only measuring stick you can have while building a moral system and actually analyzing the moral results.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Truth, would you say that at least in this case, truth is synonymous with reality?
Yeah, you have to have a reality.
Truth is the way things are. Truth is how it is.
Exactly.
And that includes the inputs and outputs of those things. And if morals is the measure of, how are we doing it, if we're aiming at how we think things ought to be, morals are maybe the guide, the framework that we use to even conceptualize how we think things ought to be, right? And then we take action to move in that direction. Truth, like you said, is the measuring stick. It's the metrics. It's the feedback mechanism to tell us, okay, how are we doing at that? How are we doing? It's what are the moral results, of what we're aiming at? And so if you get rid of truth, then you have no way of determining if what you claim to be striving for is actually occurring. And so I think that's really important to lay out here. If someone says, gosh, it's really bad if you get rid of truth, I think most people would agree with that statement. But it's not just some simple thing about, well, should you tell the truth or whatever? It's that this is a fundamental aspect of building a society that works, and not just on a macro level, but building relationships that work. They have to be built on truth. Was it Eliza Schlesinger just came out with that movie based on do you know about this? She wrote this movie and did it didn't get very good reviews, but it's based on a true story. It's almost verbatim a true story of something that happened where she wound up in a relationship with this guy that was completely a lie, where he made up all this stuff about going to Harvard and his mom had cancer and he did this and lived this out. Like, I don't remember what it's called, but my wife watched it. She was on Rogan a couple weeks ago and she talked about it, but this totally happened to her, where she wound up in a relationship with this guy and everything he told her was a lie. Right. And so truth is how we establish, like, again, that framework of what are our goals in this relationship? How are we doing at that? What are our goals in this society? How are we doing at that? So it's absolutely necessary. So sorry to deviate a little bit there from the notes, but I think it's important to establish why truth matters. It's what we use to determine whether or not what we're doing is working.
Yeah. And there's some great irony in that statement too, why truth matters. There's not one person in this world who I think, if you said, does truth matter, that they would answer no.
Right.
I think just about, everyone who's not a crazy sociopath or something, would answer yes. But then the change you can have in there is the redefinition of words. Something, again, we'll get to later, is like, you can redefine truth in order to make it seem like truth is just whatever makes things equitable. Truth is whatever doesn't hurt people's feelings. Truth is whatever serves the plan is truth now. And that's an easy way to manipulate by ironically using untruth to define truth, that allows people to believe that, even if it's not empirically true, that, you get LeBron James quote that if you walk outside as a black person, walk out your front door, that you're automatically in threat of getting killed by the cops, even though it's not empirically true. It sounds right. It fits a good, well-rounded narrative that they got going, and it allows them to garner more power to make sure that if it were empirically true, that they'd be able to stop it. And that's the whole point.
And it's an assertion that is frightening to push back against.
Yeah.
Right. So even for the person who goes, I don't know about that, it's sufficiently dangerous as a claim that most people are like, I don't feel comfortable pushing back against it. So it makes this false sense of being true, even if it's not. And there's that terraforming aspect. So to go back, just to reiterate one of the aspects of the quote that you read a minute ago, you said, though this changing of things involves a change in moral standards, it is not necessarily entirely anti-moral. They are destructive of all morals because they undermine one of the foundation of all morals, the sense of respect for truth. And this idea about how, look, the way that they change this stuff, and you just alluded to it there, it's not anti-moral necessarily, just because they're getting rid of our contemporary understanding of what is moral or good or right or virtuous or whatever. It's not anti-moral. And it reminded me of that quote from Eric Hoffer, where he says, though ours is a godless age, it is the very opposite of irreligious. And so, it's like you could just supplant some of that verbiage in there and say, look, though ours is an immoral age, it's not anti-moral. It's just that they have created this new set of morals. I mean, look at the arguments, look at what the foundation is of any of the main culture war, again, for lack of a better terminology there. Conflicts that we have on a societal level, they're all morally based. Wear a mask, go get the vaccine. Don't you care about the common good, the greater good? I mean, that was the who is the quote? Sam Harris. I think I sent that to you. What we have here is a fundamental error on people's part to get on board with the greater good. I mean, I think that's what I texted you. Sam Harris said that, and so
It's the flip
Black Lives
side
Matter.
of,
You don't care about Black lives. I mean,
right.
all this is moral. So sorry, on the flip side.
Well, what I was to say is that Sam Harris quote is just the flip side of, you guys need to stop worrying about all your liberties and freedom and care about other people.
Fuck your freedoms.
Yeah, the only way you can carry, as he's established in previous chapters, is individual freedom is a prerequisite for everything else.
Yep.
Once you stop caring about that and you only care about the collective over individual freedom, well, now whoever runs the collective is going to be the one getting all that power. You actually have to aggressively worry about yourself and your family. And I'm not pitching the Ayn Randian be selfish is a good thing type of stuff, but I am pitching the individualism is actually a pretty good thing. Whenever someone says you need to worry about the collective more than yourself, they're selling you a false bill of goods there. They're trying to gain that coercive power from you. And the worst thing you can do, which a lot of people are doing today, is volunteering that power.
100%.
And
demanding you do the same.
Exactly.
And demanding that you do the same. I did it. I got on board. I did my part. That's the thing you're hearing a lot these days. I did my part. Okay. So here's this quote: the need to rationalize the likes and dislikes, which, for the lack of anything else, must guide the planner in many of his decisions, and necessitate and the necessity of stating his reasons in a form in which they will appeal to as many people as possible, will force him to construct theories. So what he's saying here is, in order for the planner to rationalize what he's doing and just the specifics of what he's doing, he's going to have to come up with theories. Because again, it's one thing to say the greater good, right? Once you start to get into the actions, now we're in specifics, and people are going to be like, what about that specific or this specific? So now you're going to have to come up with a scientific basis for the specifics of what you're doing. So he says you're going to come up with theories, i.e. assertions about the connections between facts, which then become an integral part of the governing doctrine. So you're just going to come up with all these contrived, formulas of, trust the science, believe the science, worship the science, or the widespread dislike of the individual civilization and a romantic yearning for country life, together with a probably erroneous idea about the special value of country people as soldiers, provide the basis for another myth, blood and soil, for example. That was a World War II, especially Nazi Germany, expressing not merely ultimate values, but a whole host of beliefs about cause and effect, which, once they have become ideals directing the activity of the whole community, must not be questioned. So to put a fine point on that, the planner starts to act specifically. It might just be based on his prejudices, maybe not, but maybe so. Either way, he's going to have a ready-made rationalization for the public. And that ready-made rationalization is going to come in the form of some theories. It's not going to be an ethical code or a moral code. It's going to have to be grounded in some contrived statement of facts and theories. And he says here about how it's going to be values about the whole host of beliefs that cause and effect, or something like that. If we do this, then this. And that's what gets in where you talked about the moral values versus the moral basis versus the moral outcomes. It's the goal is not evidence of the goal, as Burnham would say. And so he's saying, look, once we come up with these theories, so we're not just talking about the ethics. Once we come up with whatever theories, right, wrong, based in prejudice, based in fact, doesn't matter. They are set in stone. They cannot be questioned, because if they're questioned, well, then we get some negative outcomes, which I think you're probably going to get to here. But
yeah, I find it interesting that he used the word theories here. I actually think this might be James Lindsay's favorite book, or going to be his favorite book, or I don't know. But I think
if he reads it, I hope so.
I think I just find it interesting that he used the words theories here, because we see it so much today, talking about cynical theories there, and just how this theory is kind of this blanket statement that allows you to make immoral claims but kind of build a moral code, moral foundation behind it to make it seem like it's not as bad, and also makes you scared because of some of the topics they talk about, makes you scared to push back against those theories, right? But the theories we see today, the theories provide foundation for these myths, or you could even say they're just plain myths themselves, and can create a dogmatic ideologies that create the moral frameworks in the complete absence of truth. And this is really the bridge between facts and anti-truth or untruth. And it must not be questioned. Again, that last statement must not be questioned is extremely important, because, you know, there's the facts that, and this is I don't know if I put the quote down here, but I actually do really like this quote. So the fact here is a disparity found in real data. The theory is all unequal outcomes are caused by overt or covert racism, prejudice, discrimination, something like that. And for someone in the Claremont Review of Books was doing a review of Thomas Sowell's book, and he put this brilliant thing in there that all disparities are treated guilty until proven innocent.
Yep.
And it's that idea that no reasonable statistician or anyone who can analyze data would actually take that as true, because it just doesn't make sense. So there can be disparities for a million different reasons. There are all these variables in there, but what these people do is they bring that multivariate problem down into a single variable, and they just say racism is here. Now find out exactly where it is. And the result is you must force or fix or plan these outcomes to make sure that we can get rid of these evil disparities in there. So I think this is the theory here is that bridge between the facts and the untruth that allow them to get away with sometimes blatant lies, certainly an absence of truth in there, but allow them to also build this moral framework around it that insulates them from criticism and allows other people, other institutions, mainstream media, the universities, all these other institutions to also buy into that theory and just repeat those talking points and put that into the mainstream.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
So the next quote here, I actually really enjoy. And I'll get into it here. So, quote, the most effective way of making people accept the validity of the values they are to serve is to persuade them that they are really the same as those which they, or at least the best among them, have always held, but which were not properly understood or recognized before. Something I kind of tried to bring up before is, you know, they cannot just say up means down, left means right, black means white. They have to say, this has always been here. I bet you believe that you just didn't understand it, but, you know, now it's here. I'm here to explain that to you. And now we can change this moral framework, and you're not going to skip a beat. To continue, quote, the people are made to transfer their allegiance from the old gods to the new under the pretense that the new gods really are what their sound instinct had always told them, but what before they had only dimly seen. So I think a good example of this is it's the switcheroo, right? It is convincing the Christians that Jesus was a socialist pacifist, or that the Democrats were the ones who were really against slavery and really against Jim Crow. The whole time they just were under the name Republican until their
Southern strategy.
Exactly. They're just under the name Republican until their marketing teams decided to switch names. You know, it's an old trick, but a useful trick. It is convincing you that you've just interpreted this story wrong. You just interpreted the set of morals wrong. And now we need to switch them and with a good old twist. And that's just what you believe the whole time.
Yeah. It's a lot harder to just come up with new words, right? I remember posting about this on Ruben's locals, man, a year and a half ago, maybe. And about how like you can't, dude, I think even James Darian has talked about this, like James's, you know, I know we both really like James, but I think one of his ideas was we need to come up with new words whenever it comes to some of this stuff, or at least the conservatives need to come up with new words. I believe, I don't think I'm misquoting him. James, if I am, go ahead and correct me if you're not watching this and you can't do that, well, then I banged your mom. So anyway, but the point is his point was that you have to come up with new words. And what Hayek is saying, no. They will hijack the meaning of these words. And we'll get into what some of those are specifically, but they'll do that to convince you that you've always agreed with this. And I love how he uses, it's the old gods, because what do gods represent? They are these things that we are subservient to. And so values like justice and equality and whatever, those are the old gods. And he's saying, no, we're just going to redefine the old gods. That's why Lindsay does call CRT the lockpick into Western civilization, because we are so sensitive about race for good reason in a lot of ways. And so it's like, if you have something that people are already really sensitive about and really care about, like, what's more practical? Come up with some new thing to try and convince them to care about, or just hijack the thing that they already do care about, right? And so that's what Hayek is lining out here. And, one of the things that made me think of is about how, like, just one example is, I mentioned CRT, is they'll say, oh, this is just a modern iteration of the civil rights movement, right? This is even though in the CRT and introduction textbook, they say that they reject traditional civil rights and they want to do something else. But what you'll see, the Mott and Bailey defense is, no, this is just the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and so they
refer to a lot of the civil rights leaders as ignorant. If you read their material, like
right,
there's ignorant.
They have no
bad people, but they just didn't understand anything, and they were naive, and they thought this whiteness thing could go away, but it's ingrained here. It's here to stay, and there's no way to get rid of it. And they set up that framework. Sorry to derail what you're saying.
No, you're fine.
They set this framework up to make sure that this is an imaginary dragon that will never leave, because once it leaves, their power is gone, right? They cannot ask for power to fight this imaginary dragon if it's gone. So they are always going to set up a system where they're always needed. Their coercive power is used for your benefit. And if this dragon ever disappears, all of a sudden they're out of power. They can't have that happen.
Yeah, and it's not, if you don't see it, it's because it got craftier, right? It got more covert. It's like those old memes where it'd be like a picture of like a tree in a park, and it's just, a regular picture, and then it'd be like ninjas. There's 13 in this picture, and of course, it's just a picture. There's no ninjas in it. Right. That's how they see this stuff. It's like, well, if you don't see it, it's that's how hidden it is, and that's why they use terms like you have to root it out.
Exactly. Did you know Larry Elder's a white supremacist?
Right. Yeah. He's the white face, whatever. Have you seen the clips of montages of how the LA Times is just like free?
Yeah.
I voted no. It was trending on Twitter today of people who are voting and recall about how they voted no and recalling Gavin Newsom. Again, what is hegemony, right? You have Joe Biden, whatever role he is, he's not president, but whatever role he is, coming out and saying that, well, we need to keep Gavin Newsom in power. It's like that piece of shit.
You say he's not president or he's not present?
Both.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps.
He's the first college in his family to go to institution.
No, hey, I'm the first college in my family to go to Mars. Hey, listen. Got a bad dude. So, but anyway, whenever Hayek talks about this redefinition of words, and this is one of the things that caused me to post this a couple years ago, is he says, look, here's the old gods. Now, of course, in Hayek's context, he says that the word that's suffered the most in terms of being redefined is liberty. Obviously, 80 years later, it's changed a little bit. But he also uses freedom, justice, law, rights, and equality. And, we can add new words like victim, oppression, science, for example. And these are the words that, like, here's one. I even remember before any of this stuff, people used to say, because science. Right? Or trust the science, or it's science. Like that was a meme, even, because it was just obvious of like, no, that's just
an anchorman, didn't he say, made a derogatory comment against women, like, oh, men's brains are 3 times your size. It's science.
It's science.
Like that's what they're doing. That's literally
exactly
what they're doing. They say an absurd claim that they want to be true and say it's science. Don't worry about it.
It's indisputable.
97% agree.
Yeah. They'll say there's a consensus, right? The scientific consensus, or this is an established fact, right? Or the opposite has been debunked. Remember how the lab leak thing was debunked? Anyway, but so
how dare you?
Yeah, how absolutely dare you? Go to school. But they'll use these words, and this is not something to gloss over. I mean, and he gets into the specifics. I think actually. Is that we're not going to get into the section where he talks about the brothers, or are we going to read that? Is it with the, when they switch the words? I think we are going to read that. Never mind.
Maybe. We do get a lot into the science and the change over there. He digs a lot actually into the science. So I was surprised. Again, like to feel vindicated from a guy writing in 1944
right.
is awesome, but horrible at the same time.
Feels good, man. Yeah. And so if we don't, I think it is in this next section. So I won't get into it. If it's not, then I'll bring it up later. In terms of the despoiling of language and how all of language becomes, these double meaning. Again, Orwell reviewed this book and went on to write Animal Farm literally a year after this was released. And then 1984, maybe 4 years after that, I think was 84-59, perhaps, or 49, I believe, maybe. I could be wrong. You can check me. I was wrong about Hoffer, so who knows? But as we mentioned earlier, this is one of those, the next section we're about to get into is there is no way to summarize this without detracting from it. There's no condensed, annotated, version that we can give that will not detract from it. Maybe if we would have went back and looked at how Reader's Digest back in the late 40s, early 50s had done it, maybe, but it's still worth it to read this. So what we're going to go into next is we're going to quote a couple of pages of this book to you. Okay. So I'm sorry, not sorry. And we are going to include the text of this in the description whenever we post this, whether it's Locals, YouTube, wherever. And so you can follow along with us if you want. Hopefully you do. Hopefully you can pull up the PDF or whatever, or you just got the book. But we've divided this into 3 sections that we'll kind of talk about. But this is so important, so important, and relates to today that I don't know how else to do it other than just quoting it. I mean, do you have anything to add, Kevin, before I start reading this?
No,
I mean, it's just
when you said no one could paraphrase this down. I'm like, well, there were some people who could do it in the condensed version, and even Hayek was surprised they were able to do it effectively.
Right. He said he couldn't do it. He's like, I could not.
He didn't even try. But luckily, those people understood that us Americans, because it was condensed for the American version, us Americans don't like to read too much.
Yep.
Make it into a movie, they said.
Can you fit it in a Vine? Remember Vines?
Yeah.
Okay.
Spielberg do it.
That's right. Yeah. All right, here we go. It is not difficult to deprive the great majority of independent thought, but the minority who will retain an inclination to criticize must also be silenced. We have already seen why coercion cannot be confined to the acceptance of the ethical code underlying the plan according to which all society is directed. Since many parts of this code will never be explicitly stated, since many parts of the guiding scale of values will exist only implicitly in the plan itself in every detail, in fact, every act of government must become sacrosanct and exempt from criticism. Sacrosanct is like sacred, holy. You cannot criticize it, right? If people are to support the common effort without hesitation, greater good, for example, they must be convinced that not only the end aimed at, but also the means chosen are the right ones. The official creed to which adherence must be enforced will therefore comprise all the views about facts on which the plan is based. Again, sacrosanct. Public criticism or even expression of doubt must be suppressed because they tend to weaken public support. As the Webb's report of position in every Russian enterprise, quote, whilst the work is in progress, any public expression of doubt or even fear that the plan will not be successful is an act of disloyalty and even treachery because of its possible effects on the will and on the efforts of the rest of the staff, end quote. When the doubt or fear expressed concerns not the success of a particular enterprise, but of the whole social plan, it must be treated even more as sabotage. So mere doubt is sabotage. It's harm, violence maybe. Facts and theories must thus become no less the object of an official doctrine than views about values. This is the opposite of the scientific method, by the way, folks. Facts and theories are a thing that are constantly there to be criticized, to figure out if they're true or not, and to be refined, but they're saying no. And the whole apparatus for spreading knowledge, the schools and the press, wow, that doesn't have any. Radio and motion picture, so big tech and Hollywood, again, no application here whatsoever, will be used exclusively to spread the views which, whether true or false, will strengthen the belief in the rightness of the decision taken by the authority. And all information that might cause doubt or hesitation will be withheld. Once again, it's not just about lying to people. It's about keeping them from the truth. It's about keeping any alternative perspectives away from them. The probable effect on the people's loyalty to the system becomes the only criterion for deciding whether a particular piece of information is to be published or suppressed. I'm going to read that again. The probable effect on the people's loyalty to the system is the only criterion for deciding whether a particular piece of information is to be published or suppressed. Not truth, not moral value, nothing else. It's just, hey, is this in line with the plan or not? Period. That's the filter. The situation in a totalitarian state is permanently and in all fields the same that it is elsewhere in some fields in wartime. Again, war on drugs, war on COVID. Everything which might cause doubt about the wisdom of the government or create discontent will be kept from the people. The basis of unfavorable comparisons with conditions elsewhere, how are they doing? Maybe we could do that instead. The knowledge of possible alternatives to the course of action taken. Hey, we maybe tried this. Information which might suggest failure on the part of the government to live up to its promises. Maybe these vaccines don't work as we were promised. Or to take advantage of opportunities to improve conditions. Do lockdowns work? All will be suppressed. There is consequently no field, no area, no realm, no aspect of your life, private, public, personal, whatever, where the systemic control of information will not be practiced and uniformity of views not enforced. They have to inject the plan everywhere. Once they decide on what it is, true or false, it could be true. It could be true. And that's one of the problems. We don't know. This system is incapable of telling us what is true. That's the problem. Because it will filter out all doubt, anything that goes against it in every situation, right? So this has to infect everything, media. I mean, he says it right there, schools and education and the print, the news, the radio and television, right? You know, video killed the radio star.
Motion
and then
picture.
That's right. Yeah, VHS. But seriously, everything has to align around the plan and the rightness of those enforcing the plan, right? So you see this clip on Twitter yesterday, Stephen Colbert and Chuck Schumer dancing around like a bunch of pieces of shit that they are, you know, and it's like, this is, they all agree with each other. It's all this same muck of propagandistic bullshit, but that's how this thing works. And you cannot be exposed to even doubts, to even alternatives, to other perspectives. Why do you think, and this last thing I'll say, why do you think that not one country, or not one news agency, corporate press, whatever, ran a story about how America is in the minority of countries globally that recommends these experimental vaccines for pregnant women? We're in the minority. Most countries don't. Even the WHO is like, no. And the WHO is like, probably not with kids, right? Also, booster shots, probably not a good idea. All right. So that's not me tinfoil hatting. It's just the WHO, which is, by the way, beholden to China, you know, but even the WHO is like, not a good idea. Why do you think that we're not hearing about the people marching against this stuff in France? Or again, why countries like Germany and stuff are like, you know, we'll hear about these other countries when what they're doing goes along with what our establishment wants. Hey, maybe we should try gun control like Australia or New Zealand or whatever. Maybe we should try lockdowns like these other countries. But when those other countries are like, hey, probably not for pregnant women, we don't have enough information. It could be good. Again, might be fine. We don't know. But this system is incapable of telling you whether or not something is true. But that is suppressed. It has to be suppressed. You cannot be given alternative perspectives. This is so crucial. People, if you're watching this, it's so crucial to understand the difference between just lying to someone and also included in that shielding them from all other alternative perspectives. They are effectively the same thing. You cannot determine what's true in that kind of system. And that's where we're at. And that's what Hayek's talking about here.
Yeah. He begins this section by saying it is not difficult to deprive the great majority of independent thought. I think that on its face is easy, but think about why they do it. It is that it's not difficult to convince the majority to deprive themselves of their ability to think independently. I think that's important. They freely give it up. Again, that's the sales pitch. You don't want to convince, you don't want to say this is good for this, and this reason. You want them to say, wow, this is good for me for this, and this reason. They're
spontaneous, produce it. Yeah.
They have to produce it, and also allowing them to freely give it up is important. And then allowing those people who freely give it up to turn on the people as the out group who don't want to freely give it up and say, you guys are the problem. You guys are ruining everything for us who voluntarily gave all this stuff up. Stop ruining our lives, right? Why don't you just go along with the plan, right? So it's the independent-minded minority that won't stand for the groupthink that must be silenced by those who want to have complete control of the narrative and the information apparatus. So like we talked about before, mainstream media, Hollywood, entertainment, big tech platforms who now act, this is important here, they act as the public square. That's important. Yep. This is the public square now. And when I say public square, as I was kind of writing up, my thoughts on this, I'm like, does the real physical public square exist anymore? Kind of, not really. You can go to the grocery store, you can go to a baseball game, you can talk about stuff. Sure. COVID hits, those are no longer options in a lot of areas.
Well, so define the public square, define that for people, because people might have a different view of that. But what the public square is specifically is incredibly important, especially in the context of big tech discussion.
Where you can freely exchange ideas without the fear of a third party coercive power coming in there and say, stop saying that, or you can't say that. Right.
Yep.
So it's important. That's why, stuff I'm not comfortable saying all my views on Facebook because people might take it the wrong way. Right. When I say I don't believe Black Lives Matter because I don't believe there's such a thing as a Black life, that's not great to say on Facebook. You're getting a lot of pushback on that. Maybe a fact checker is going to come in.
That's not true. I don't know what you're talking
about. Yeah. Right. So I get to go out to a baseball game or, just go out and hang out. I play softball. I play all these activities. I get to go out, I do jujitsu, stuff like that. I get to go out and talk with real people and see their faces sometimes. And now you have COVID where they shut everything down. And now they've exclusively, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here and say this is why they did it, but this is a byproduct of what they're doing.
It's the thing that happened.
Yeah. When they shut down all other alternatives of a physical public square and force you to go into these social media platforms, these spaces that are now monitored and fact checked, and you can get kicked off of them. Now this is the public square you're in, and they have complete control of it. Right? Think about it. Information is power, and us not being able to convey information to each other is just allowing them to maintain the power. And right when we talk about power, is they have the power, and the people who have allowed themselves to think independently, have their own power. But once they shut that down, they suppress those ideas, they suppress those voices. That power, goes away. So I think the control of information acts like a screen that allows the acceptable information to go through while blocking the others. And this is how they grow and maintain power.
So the public square, I also just think about, do you know what a town crier was?
Person who cried over everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there was a person in towns that would often have like a bell. You're thinking 16th, 17th century Europe. And they would be in the middle of town and they would proclaim news and information. And so that's what the town crier was. And in fact, a lot of early American newspapers were called the town crier because they were the place where you got information. And if you go to like ancient Roman settlements, whether in ancient Greece, Rome, Israel even has many of these. There was an area called the Cardo, and the Cardo was this big road that went. It was like the front of town, and it was paved and it had like these archways and stuff. And then you'd go in, and there might be a fountain in the middle, And off of that is where you would have these little pathways that would go to the different shops and stuff. That was that public market, the town square. And that's where people would gather to talk, to meet, to confer, to go back and forth. When you think about even just like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, those are the places where they would go and talk to people a lot of times to get to have these kind of public debates about stuff. So the public square was this place to debate ideas, to communicate ideas, observations, theories, hypothesis, whatever, and to put that out there, because at that point in time, there was this idea of all I care about is what's true. So I'll just put this out here and we can talk about it, right? And so wherever truth ends up being, whether it's within the idea I put out there or somewhere else, that's what I'm going to land on. I'm subservient to truth. You're subservient to truth. If you have a different idea than I do, let's take our ideas, let's put them next to each other and see what's good, what's bad. And that, as John Stuart Mill says, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So this idea, like you said, and by the way, I don't think it's conspiratorial to say that tech was a big influence in, the let's say the monitoring and patrolling of the public square in a digital way, especially during COVID. What ends up happening there is if it's curated, it would be as if during pre-Reformation times, there are these public square debates and people are out and they're talking like, what do you think about what Luther did? And every time Luther is mentioned, someone shows up and just cuts their head off, out in that public square. And then it's like, well, guess we're not going to talk about Luther anymore. That's kind of what we're running into here. And Hayek is saying this is what the authoritarians do by censoring and curating this information. And I think your parallels with big tech are 100% spot on, because that's what we're seeing. I don't know if you saw, there was I don't know if this was Project Veritas or not, but there's a person who worked for Google for many years who came out maybe a week or two ago. It's within the last 2 weeks, and said, we prioritized all negative press for Donald Trump pretty early into the presidency.
Yeah.
In our algorithms. And that's that curation of the public square. That's a problem. That's a problem, because once again, as Hayek says, it's truth. And we'll get into actually exactly his quote there, but it's not what's true that is most important. What's most important is, does it serve the plan or not? Does it serve the legitimation of our plan and of our power or not? Yeah. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That I do remember that Veritas clip where they did say they prioritize all the negative stuff. But even if you saw the negative breakdown by these third party people who just analyze the news, it's like they always came up with 95% negative, 5% positive. So there's not a lot of like positive to go around.
Where was the positive? What are they even talking about?
I don't know. He said that he didn't call Hillary Clinton a dog face one time, but.
Dog face pony soldier.
Exactly.
What was that?
That was Biden. But what you talking about, fat? I think
listen, fat.
But there's like so little positive press. And I'm not saying negative press is not truth. It doesn't mean it's untruth. There's plenty of negative things you can say about President Trump.
We don't know.
Exactly. But even prioritizing a little bit in front of everything else. So it's like, already you kind of see an asymmetry of information that's getting out there more generally. If everyone had the objective scope of all of this information out there, all of the think pieces, opinion pieces out there, there's just a small section of it that would affirm anything that they like about Donald Trump. And then they prioritize everything else in front of that. So it's kind of that small minority of stuff that gets out there. That's what they silence. That's what they suppress. That's what they use the algorithms to make sure that goes to the bottom, and all the stuff that they favor goes to the top. So when I was talking about the conspiracy theory, I don't think it's conspiracy theory to say that they're curating their content. I think that's where you start with truth, because it's fairly obvious from what we know right now. My thing with conspiracy theory is I didn't want to think COVID was just this one thing to keep us out of the physical public square into the digital public square. I don't think that COVID was just made for that in a lab somewhere. I think it was made in a lab somewhere, but I don't think it was for that reason specifically. I just think
it was made in a lab somewhere. I think it was made in a lab in Wuhan, in China.
Yeah. John Stewart told me. I'm just saying.
Right. And it wasn't until he said that I could possibly advocate for that belief. That was the thing about that clip. I remember you posted it in your locals, and I was like, okay, fair enough. But it's like, let's not gloss over the fact that all of that information that Stewart had, and this goes with the plan and the hegemony, like none of that was new.
Oh yeah.
That motherfucker was keeping that to himself until Trump was out of office. So hell with him. And the fact that at the end of that, and the part 2 of that interview, which, kudos to him for saying it, but he felt safe saying it because, President was in. And at the end of that, when he's like, again, to Stephen Colbert, he's like, you and Dave Chappelle is what got my family through this. It's like, okay, Dave Chappelle, fair enough. But Stephen Colbert is what kept you sane during all this. It's like, that's like saying Rachel Maddow, man, if it weren't for Rachel Maddow, I would have never made it through this. It's like, get the hell out of here. So anyway, but I think there is something to that of like a thing that might be true or might be valuable. You suppress it during the time when it's not useful. And then whenever it's not going to be an impediment to your side or to the plan or the planners, then you have the freedom to put it out there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
you got to put it out there too, because when they look back and, the next election cycle, let's say 2024, and they say, well, you guys were trying to shut this down. Well, no, remember when Jon Stewart came out 3 years later?
Yeah, Jon Stewart on. Yeah.
We told them we came out with this. It's kind of like we weren't the people trying to defund the police. They were trying to defund the police because one guy said one time that, maybe we shouldn't take all the money away out of the, we should defund them completely, those damn dirty pigs. But, so all they need to do is get that on tape and they can point back to like, no, this is not, fact checkers, fact check me. It's like, only get one Pinocchio instead of 4 pants on fire, or whatever it is. So that's their little out there
garbage.
Yeah, it's amazing. So this next section gets into what I think is hilarious isn't the right word. It's that part of vindication that it's like, I feel vindicated, but I'm also so sad that this is happening still. This is something that before the book, and the something is science. The manipulation of science, the abuse of the word science and the idea of science to fit political purposes was something they were doing in 44. And, I thought it was disgusting when I thought they started doing it. And, probably like early 2000s, it started with the environmental movement, I think. And, it's not that I don't believe that there's, climate change or something like that. It's just they manipulate the science and say, these are all the things that are happening to forward our narrative. But, they believe, as I think it was a Tom McDonald quote from one of his rap songs, was they believe that, a single-celled organism or water is life on Mars, but they don't believe a fetus is life on Earth. Yeah. So they manipulate science to just manipulate whatever political message they want to put forward.
Real fast before you get into that, remember, I just had to do a Control F because I wanted to find the thing. But remember how before even this book was published, he talks about how as the war drew to a close, entities like Science Magazine had advocated that science was to be used after the war to help a more advanced planned society and reconstruct along more rational lines. And
Truth
so
is no longer a concern.
Exactly. It's whoa, we've got this. And he even gives that in the section I read where he talked about how let's do it like wartime, but you have Science Magazine. And so sorry but that's exactly what Hayek was warning about. And so the point is that he was talking about British socialists, not just Nazis, British socialists. So this is all endemic to collectivism.
Oh yeah. He'll use some examples of the socialist Nazis here, but it was certainly happening in Britain at his time, and obviously we see it happening today in America with mainstream. I would almost say they advertise it as a majority thought because, again, people are too afraid, I think, or they feel like they're not knowledgeable to push back against the science, as if science, which I hate science being used as some sort of religion or ideology. You must believe in science. No, you don't believe in science. You prove science. You can believe in religion. You can believe in an ideology, but science is not one of those things. So I think it's an important distinction that we blur now on purpose. So I've been the quote. This applies even to fields apparently most remote from any political interest, and particularly to all the sciences, even the most abstract. That in the disciplines dealing directly with human affairs and therefore most immediately affecting political views, such as history, right? Revisionist history, something I think we've heard of.
1619, bro.
Law, critical, what is it? Critical legal studies, right?
Yep.
Or economics, which is like the fact that we have socialists in 2021 is amazing. The wokenomics part of this is pretty crazy. To continue on, the disinterested search for truth cannot be allowed in a totalitarian system, and the vindication of the official views become the sole object is easily seen and has been amply confirmed by experience. These disciplines have indeed, in all totalitarian countries, become the most fertile factories of the official myths which the rulers use to guide the minds and wills of their subjects. It is not surprising that in these spheres, I like how he always uses the word spheres here. It's like this different area that you think is not connected to other areas, but it is not surprising that in these spheres, even the pretense that they search for truth is abandoned and the authorities decide what doctrines ought to be taught and published. At a certain point, you don't even have to worry about looking like you're trying to find truth. It is just, you take it. This is the science. Don't worry about researching it. You don't have to Google it. Or if you Google it, you're going to find all of our material anyways. This is the truth. Revisionist history, it's like America was only built on race. That was its main purpose, was just about race. The Civil War was just about slavery. This is the truth now. I'm not even worried, like, we're not going to look up facts and, you know, what people said back then or any trends back then. We're just going to say this is now truth. You must believe it, or you're going to be ostracized as a non-believer or a Republican rube or something as awful as a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
So to continue on, totalitarian control of opinion extends, however, also to subjects which at first seem to have no political significance, right? We talked about it, well, economics
Virology.
does, right? Law, science. I mean, these things are not supposed to be overtly political. And that's how he starts this thing out. It's like remember, the sphere of the political, everything becomes political when you have the plan, and everything needs to follow a political plan, right? Sometimes it is difficult to explain why particular doctrines should be officially proscribed, or why others should be encouraged. And it is curious that these likes and dislikes are apparently somewhat familiar in the different totalitarian systems. In particular, they all seem to have in common an intense dislike of the more abstract forms of thought, dislike. I think that was a typo there. Thought dislike, characteristically also shown by many of the collectivists among our scientists. So I'm sorry about the little typo there, but that's when I copy and paste from PDF into here, it automatically does that. Whether the theory of relativity is represented as a Semitic attack on the foundation of Christian and Nordic physics, or opposed because it is in conflict with the dialectical materialism and Marxist dogma, comes very much to the same thing. Nor does it make much difference whether certain theorems of mathematical statistics are attacked because they form part of the class struggle on the ideological frontier and are a product of the historical role of mathematics as the servant of the bourgeoisie, or whether the whole subject is condemned because it provides no guarantee that it will serve the interest of the people, right? If we feel like this finding does not serve the interest of the people, that's when you cover it up. I know, I think it was Charles Murray and Sam Harris had this discussion where he's like, you know, I believe it was Sam actually is the one who brought up to him because he wrote the bell curve. Why would you even approach the topic of intelligence and race? It just seems like something that's not worth your time. It's not worth the hassle. You know, I think Sam Harris's idea was like, why would you take all this blowback? I mean, this seems like an untouchable subject. You know, why would you take on this problem? And he was just like, it's science. This isn't for politics. This is just to find truth. And I believe as someone it was not Brett, it was Eric Weinstein, I believe, said that biology is often the study of things that you don't really want to find out and inconvenient truths. It's like stuff that you have to look for. You have to look for truth. Searching for truth is the objective. The objective switches when you make everything about politics and you follow the political plan. It switches to not finding truth, but find what reinforces the party. What helps us service the plan is the most important part. And that's why it corrupts all these institutions.
100%.
Continue. It seems that pure mathematics is no less a victim, and that even the holding of particular views about the nature of continuity can be ascribed to bourgeoisie prejudices. According to the Webs, the Journal for Marxist-Leninist Natural Sciences has the following slogans: "We stand for party in mathematics. We stand for purity of Marxist-Leninist theory in surgery." Man, you're about to go under the knife. Just picture yourself here. The gas, you're falling asleep. The surgeon's got the knife here. And he's basically asking you political questions to make sure that you're towing the party line.
Right.
Or this is what Marx believes we should do. Or if he says, you're fading out again, you're a white guy, and you're like, there's disparities between white and black outcomes. We need to make sure we equalize those disparities. Good night. And it's like, oh my God, like I'm scared, because the surgery is not for science sake. It is not meant to, improve these practices to make sure these surgeries are successful. It is now made to serve the party in whatever goals they want. And a lot of times these goals have some sort of equity outcome that they're going for. And so that now switches the calculus from proficiency to whatever the party needs me to do, I will do. And that's something that's super scary if you're ever, or in mathematics, like who wants to so I am an engineer. I went to engineering school. Real quick as a side note, I had a professor who was from Russia. They had a rule where, not Russia, I think it was one of the smaller countries outside of Russia. They had a rule that if you were an engineer and you built a bridge or you designed a bridge, by law, you had to stand under the bridge the first time it was tested. Like that's accountability, right?
It's good.
But now you have party in mathematics. It's like, how many people, knowing that they had to toe some sort of party line while developing, drawings or, sketches for this, this bridge, how many people will be willing to stand under that bridge now?
Can I interrupt you here? Yeah. So just to wed this to today, people might be like, well, what? There's not going to be Marxist, Leninist, like no one's using math. So you said it seems that pure mathematics is no less a victim, and that even the holding of particular views about the nature of continuity can be ascribed to bourgeoisie prejudices, according to the Webs. The Journal for Marxist-Leninist Natural Sciences has the following slogans: "We stand for party in mathematics." Maybe we could substitute "We stand for anti-racism in mathematics," based on what I'm about to read. Yeah. We stand for the purity of anti-racism in surgery. So let's go to mathematics. So again, he talks about, this is from the Journal of Natural Science Associated with Mathematics, is full of, quote, party in mathematics. Here is a few quotes from, this is Seattle, Washington's K through 12 proposed curriculum. This is from a few years ago. I'm reading from the PDF. This is www.k12 or k12.wa.us. So this is on their website. We can post it here. This is part of their K through 12 math ethnic studies framework. So this is from August 20th, 2019. So this is 2 years ago. Students will be able to analyze the ways in which ancient mathematical knowledge has been appropriated by Western culture. Students will be able to identify how the development of mathematics has been erased from learning in school, and students will be able to identify how math has been and continues to be used to oppress and marginalize people in communities of color. Those are, by the way, some of the milder things. I just put those in there because that lines up with what you just read, but there's so much in here of who determines what's the right answer, who determines what's wrong, how can we use math and activism, how can we use math to liberate. That's how we map this crazy. He is quoting fucking Nazis, actual Nazis and communists, in them trying to use math to justify their batshit crazy ideology. And here you have Marxist activists in the Seattle public school system now, today, making the same arguments. So whenever he's like, oh, they think the theory of relativity is just some, Jewish attack on Western culture, the same people here are saying, yeah, math is used to oppress people. How can we use it to liberate? Who decides what's the right answer anyway? And they literally talk about how we can switch from using math individually to how we can use math collectively. I mean, this is crazy shit, but this is absolutely pertinent to today because we're seeing the same crazy arguments with the same crazy and devastating and destructive outcomes today. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is exactly what Hayek is talking about.
Yeah. Two and two make five if the party needs it to.
That's right.
To finish this, the last paragraph here is entirely in keeping with the whole spirit of totalitarianism, that it condemns any human activity done for its own sake and without ulterior purpose. Science for science sake, art for art's sake are equally abhorrent to Nazis, our socialist intellectuals, and communists. You can't do it for its own sake. You got to do it for the party purpose, right? Every activity must derive its justification from the conscious social purpose. There must be no spontaneous, unguided activity because it might produce results which cannot be foreseen or for which the plan does not provide. The plan does not provide that 2 and 2 makes 5 or doesn't provide that it makes 4, then it's got to make something else. And it's got to make something that the party approves of according to its plan.
Whatever goes along with the plan. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. It might produce something new, undermined, again, that's another misspelled word, I think, of the philosophy. Undreamt. There it is. Undreamt of it. In the philosophy of the planner, the principle extends even to games and amusements. I leave it to the reader to guess whether it was in Germany or in Russia where the chess players were officially exhorted that we must finish once and for all the neutrality of chess. We must condemn once and for all chess for chess sake, like the formula art for art's sake. It's important here to understand that, when he talks about science, when he talks about all these other things, they're used to vindicate political views. And that, especially when he talks about science, he talks about the science with the capital S and the TM over the E, it's not actual science. So science, along with all these other tools, like I said before, revisionist history, critical legal studies, and moconomics, is no longer about the search for truth, but a way to validate power. And in this totalitarian control moves into other areas and subjects even further removed from politics, like math and chess. Like chess doesn't seem like it should be political whatsoever, but they make it political here. And this reminds me of an observation made by someone else, but actually I want you to read this little subquote we have down here because I like your relationship and one of these words to something else you and I have actually been listening to recently.
Which quote?
Right here, the one above. In a totalitarian state. Yeah.
In a totalitarian, so this is actually, by the way, folks, we don't always give you things in chronological order for the chapter. This is from earlier in the chapter, but we saved it for here because this German word is particularly relevant to this section. In a totalitarian state, all propaganda serves the same goal. Again, hegemony, they all agree with each other. The NBC and NPR and Harvard and the CDC are all on the same page. Wonder why. And all instruments of propaganda are coordinated to influence the individuals in the same direction, sameness, so as to produce the characteristic Gleichschaltung, which is German for coordination or sameness of all minds.
Yeah, and so Gleichschaltung is a word you've identified before, and someone else you've been listening to, Curtis Yarvin uses it in one of his talks with interviews with someone else. But what I like about that is, everyone needs to believe in the same thing, sameness. We all need to be coordinated with the plan, and we must all be in line. And what I like about this, he gives this observation made by a guy named Victor Klempener, who is a German Jew who lived through Nazi Germany. He wasn't oppressed or persecuted during Nazi Germany because I believe his wife was Aryan.
He had a German wife. Yeah.
So he had a German wife, but I guess this guy had an interest. So he had a bunch of cats and he subscribed to a cat magazine.
He just said he had a cat. All right. We don't know how many cats.
I thought he said 30 cats. I don't know.
Shitting on cat owners.
I don't know. But he subscribed to a cat magazine. You have a cat. I imagine you subscribe to a cat magazine as well. But
I have 3 cats and I do not have a cat magazine.
Oh, man, come on. But he noticed, at the beginning of the war, it was just cat magazine, and toward I think the middle end of the war,
So in 31, it was about cats, and then in 35, So again, this is
Oh yeah.
nothing on Poland or annexation of Austria or anything like that. In 35, the Cat magazine, because when was Hitler elected? What, 31?
31.
Right? So in 31, it's all about, this is about cats. By the way, I don't even know what the hell a Cat magazine is about, especially in the 1930s, but whatever. It's Angela from The Office just taking pictures. Save Bandit.
Save Bandit. Yep.
um, but in 35, it's the German cat, right? It's not just about, and the way Klemper describes it is that so brown was the color of, what the Nazis, or the brown coats and the brown shirts, right? And he says we're all swimming in the same brown sauce. And so it's not just the cat, it's the German cat. Anyway, so that's what he said. That's that glacial tongue. Everything is coordinated. Everything is sameness. And actually, Yarvin says that now today, whenever he flips open the New York Times and looks at their section about cooking, he's like the German cat, and that's the glacial tongue of how the New York Times and all these institutes coordinate today.
Yeah, so that's why now I have this idea of the German cat when I identify stuff that is no longer has its essential, the essence of the original thing. You can't do this thing for the sake of doing the thing. You can't play chess for the sake of doing chess. You have to do it for the sake of the party. German cat right there. You can't do math without some pre-approval from the state to make sure it follows the plan, that you don't get these crazy numbers that might disprove something that they're trying to force down the people's throat. Again, German cat. There's all of these modifiers that go on to these different ideas, institutions, and even what I would say some load-bearing structures of society that they kind of transform into the German cat, into the German math, the German physics, German science. And we see that a lot today, because that is some way to mask truth, is when you don't allow truth to get out there, or if there is any truth that gets out there, you're the screen for that truth, and only particular pieces gets to come out. As long as it advocates and serves the plan, then it's okay to come out in full.
That was a legitimate criticism against Taylor Swift for a long time. She just made music and didn't make political statements.
Yeah.
And so, and that was whenever she would tweet out, go out and vote. People were mad. Why aren't you telling people who to vote for? Right. And so it really was, these are things that we joke about, what's Taylor have to say? I mean, that's the joke that Dave Chappelle made. Where's Ja? We need Ja Rule to tell us.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and so it's like, you can't just do music for music's sake. Like, what are you doing? I mean, remember Chris Pratt, all of these actors who were involved in the Avengers movies were going to go do a fundraiser for Joe Biden, and Pratt's like, yeah, I'm not interested. He didn't go do a fundraiser or an event for Donald Trump. He just said, I'm not interested in doing this one for Joe Biden. And there's all of these things on Twitter about canceling Chris Pratt. It's like, you can't just be an actor. You can't just do music, right?
Yeah.
This has to be this and only this. If you're not feeding this thing, it's these mass lines of action in communism, as Marx describes, then you're doing it wrong. It has to be part of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and even the Chris Pratt example, he didn't even say stuff originally because he trends to get canceled about once a month, it seems.
Totally.
And his original statements were just about God, and people being surprised that he's a religious Christian, and people not being okay with that because, Christianity, one, has an objective moral framework associated with it that is going to bump up against the moral code that is being pushed on by the people. By the state, by the people who want to plan things, people who want to take power. And two, it's just something so rarely seen in entertainment nowadays that it's like, once he steps outside of all these people who are standing in a straight, perfect line, that is justification enough to try to cancel him, to try to.
And that's the doubt part, right? It's not even that he's advocating for something else. He's like, I'm just not doing that thing.
He didn't have a mega hat on.
That's enough.
Right. You didn't have a mega hat on, but you're already too far out of the Overton window they put here. You're you're spreading out in the wrong direction. And once they see you in the wrong direction, they're too scared that, man, you could go way out in the wrong direction.
It's over.
And they need to rein you in before any of that happens.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So then we have the last third of this section here that goes a little bit more into science and not serving truth. And it's important to close it out here. So, quote, incredible as some of these aberrations may appear, we must yet be on guard not to dismiss them as mere accidental byproducts, which have nothing to do with the essential character of a planned or totalitarian system. They are not. They are a direct result of the same desire to see everything directed by a unitary conception of the whole, of the need to uphold at all costs the views in the service of which people are asked to make constant sacrifices, and of the general idea that the knowledge and beliefs of people are an instrument to be used for a single purpose. Once science has to serve not truth, but the interests of a class, the community, or state, the sole task of argument and discussion is to vindicate and to spread still further the beliefs by which the whole life of the community is directed. As the Nazi Minister of Justice has explained, the question which every new scientific theory must ask itself is, do I serve National Socialism for the greatest benefit of all? Right here, it's like you need to serve the plan, serve the state. And, as Orwellian, or we call it Orwellian now, is something as the Minister of Justice, which is like the czar of something else. The Minister of Justice is effectively the CDC now, right? Because they can make all these rules.
A little bit, yeah.
So as scary as it sounds, they're much more open about their labels in Nazi Germany because they could. Today, again, because these power systems need to be a bit more covert, they allow these bureaucracies to take over and act as those ministries of justice and be those unelected bureaucrats that can control more of our lives.
Well, and even in there, when what you just read, where he says the need to uphold at all costs the views in the service of which people are asked to make constant sacrifices. Do we have any analogs for that today? Right.
No.
Anything today where people were asked to make sacrifices or do certain things, and we have to uphold the views.
It's for the greater good, Truman.
That's right. So no. So we have no analogs for that today. No one's been asked to sacrifice things and then build up resentment whenever what they've been promised doesn't happen. Okay, I was just curious. I didn't think anything like that would happen.
No, not unless for the greater good. The word truth itself ceases to have its old meaning. It describes no longer something to be found with the individual conscience as the sole arbiter of whether in any particular instance the evidence or the standing of those proclaiming it warrants a belief. It becomes something to be laid down by authority, something which has to be believed in the interest of the unity of the organized effort, and which may have to be altered as the exigencies of this organized effort require it. So again, everything needs to be according to the plan. Everything needs to be organized according to the plan. It needs to be complete unity, or be advertised complete unity, right? It's the scientific consensus is advertised as this complete unity.
And they get there. How do they land on truth and consensus? Do they come up with it on their own, or is it administered to them? Is it laid down for them?
Right.
That's what he says there, right? It's laid down by authority.
Yeah.
Right. So don't trust any of your observations. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I'm going to keep bringing back to COVID. I don't care.
Yeah.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Don't worry about the fact that we have all these reports about, what was it yesterday? Jesse Jackson and his wife, fully vaccinated, come down with COVID, the space AIDS variant. They got the D, and there it is. But you know what I mean? And so truth is a thing that is fed to you, not a thing that you're working out in your own mind.
Yeah, it's absolutely fed to you. It's something you have to believe in. And they say there's a consensus on this, but then you hear of like doctors all the time getting silenced. If there was a consensus on this, you really think you'd have to put a fact check on every single thing that has the word COVID pandemic
excellent observation,
or coronavirus in it? Well, no, it's kind of like the idea of common sense. The common sense is never something you have to proclaim, or it's not common sense. If you ever have to say this is common sense, it's not, because you would know it already intuitively if it were. So now here, the general intellectual climate which this produces, the spirit of complete cynicism as regards truth, or as regards to truth, which it endangers, the loss of the sense or even the meaning of truth, the disappearance of the spirit of independent inquiry and of the belief in the power of rational conviction, the way in which differences of opinion in every branch of knowledge become political issues to be decided by authority, are all things which one must personally experience. No short description can convey their extent. Perhaps the most alarming fact is the contempt for intellectual liberty is not a thing which arises only once the totalitarian system is established, but one which can be found everywhere among intellectuals who have embraced a collectivist faith and who are acclaimed as intellectual leaders, even in countries still under a liberal regime. Real quick, liberal right here. I think we kind of explained it.
There it is.
Yeah,
it is in this
so we
chapter.
use it a couple of times. Liberal is the 19th century European sense where you stay away, or you advocate against all forms of coercion by the government.
Right.
Whereas liberal, if you're listening to this in America now, which I imagine most of you are, it means completely the opposite. That's where the derivation of libtard comes from, which is completely
Exact
stupid.
polar opposite.
So whether you actually advocate for socialism, effectively this. So if you're reading it that way, it's going to mean the complete opposite. But liberal regime meaning liberal, conservative, American conservative, libertarian. Continue. Not only is even the worst oppression condemned if it is committed in the name of socialism and the creation of a totalitarian system openly advocated by people who pretend to speak for the scientists of liberal countries, intolerance too is openly extolled. Have we not recently seen a British scientific writer defend even Inquisition because, in his opinion, it is beneficial to the science when it protects a rising class? This view is, of course, particularly indistinguishable from the views which led the Nazis to the persecution of men of science, the burning of scientific books, and the systematic eradication of the intelligentsia of the subjected people. So basically what he's going down here is truth no longer matters because it no longer means objective facts in reality. So something you pointed out really aptly at the beginning is that there needs to actually be like an objective reality for truth to mean anything. Because if there's no objective reality, then there is no truth. But now it just means whatever the authority deems is best for the plan. So everything must serve the plan, right? Science must serve the plan. Education must serve the plan. Law must serve the plan. History and how we remember it, right? Revisionist history, 1619 project, that serves the plan. Reality must serve the plan. So nothing maintains its original essence anymore. And we're no longer in the arena of just changing words. We are changing the perception of reality itself. And that is this change here. Yes, you can start out by slowly changing these words, but as you change the words, you start to change the reality of these people as you throw these words under science, under law, under education. That's the important power that comes with this. It's not just as simple as, switching out equality for equity, although that example right there does change perceptions of reality if you don't explain the differences between those two words.
What's remarkable to me, and I was literally just thinking about the equality and equity thing, is they will redefine words. But whenever they do start using new words like equity, I mean, it still blows my mind that Vice President Harris released that video the day before the election about the difference between equality and equity. And it was about creating the moral virtues of creating quality of outcome. Absolutely insane. And so in those cases, they will be honest about the definition of words. They will just go back to what Hayek talks about here, where they'll use their ethical code or whatever to justify. So they have to get people on board with the ethical code, and then they have to get people on board with the means, equity, right, of creating or facilitating that ethical code. But in the other cases, I mean, diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity and inclusion are two words that absolutely mean different things. Equity is the one, and I think even Lindsay does a breakdown. This is maybe a year ago where he breaks down the DIE stuff, and He's like, equity is the one that actually they don't change the meaning of it all. They don't mean a different thing. This is exactly what they mean. They are relying on your misunderstanding of it. But diversity means something else. Equity or inclusion, it means exclusion. Diversity actually means hegemony and conformity. I mean, these all mean completely different things. Literally, almost in most cases, the exact opposite, right? Compassion means the opposite. Oppressor often is the the person being oppressed in that specific situation. You're the oppressor in this situation. I didn't do anything. I'm not feeling like that. I'm feeling like the opposite, right? But that's what they'll do. That's absolutely what they'll do. And like you said, they change perceptions of reality accordingly as a result. That's where this crap terraforms reality and uses a false perception of consensus along the lines of these crazy ass definitions to change their outcomes in reality, to change the outcomes.
Yeah. Reality is a difficult, or at least objective reality is a difficult thing to properly define as it is. So I think it kind of makes it easier, right? I think we've had a discussion with someone before, and they're adamant saying that I don't believe that objective reality is actually a thing. There's too many realities perceived by different people, but I believe objective reality to be, I think I've explained maybe in a previous podcast, it's like a puzzle. It's where everyone's got what they've seen, their subjective reality that they see, and you need to piece different subjective realities together and look at the underlying facts that match up to actually build a picture of what objective reality is. It's a lot.
And gravity doesn't care. Gravity doesn't care what my perception of it is.
Try to jumping off a roof and see if it works. If you can identify as a woman, you can identify as Superman. I'm just saying.
And that's true. And I think that's been confirmed. So,
yeah. But it's something that's already easy to take advantage of, along with, like you said before, most people don't particularly tend toward independent thinking. So taking advantage of those two aspects to, terraform reality for most people, and most people aren't going to push back against that attempt, no matter how overt it is, makes it fairly easy to do so and gain power and traction like this.
Yep. Yeah. So here's another quote. What is essential to make intellectual freedom serve its function as a prime mover of intellectual progress is not that everybody may be able to think or write anything, but that any cause or idea may be argued by somebody, right? So just to go back a little bit to what Kevin said and just putting a fine point on the section that we read verbatim. We read that section verbatim because it needed to be read. And there is this stuff afterwards where Hayek is bringing this chapter to a conclusion, right? He is bringing it home. So he lays out, here's the need, here's the how, and then here's the outcome. And so what he's saying here is that these ideas, people need to be able to argue whatever it is that they land on. It could be wrong, it could be right, but there needs to be that diversity of opinion and viewpoints, and skepticism is part of that. So long as dissent is not suppressed, which it is, again, just ask yourself, by the way, do you feel like dissent is a thing that's suppressed or not in our current day and age, right? Just ask yourself that. Dissent against any of these things, are they suppressed or not?
If you ask yourself the question and you find, well, I don't think dissent is particularly suppressed in this particular arena. I don't think when a NFL player, a basketball player, ends up arguing that he doesn't believe police are acting in their best interest, well, that dissent's totally okay with. So what direction is the dissent going in? Is an important question to ask yourself as well.
Define dissent. No, that's good, Kevin. That's really good. Yeah. So again, I think I was talking to someone the other day, and I think it was Carter and with Unsafe Spaces said, I don't know what happened with the election in 2020, but the fact that I'm not allowed to talk about it tells me everything I need to know. Mm-hmm. And so again, it's not necessarily what is being advocated for, but it's like, okay, what am I not allowed to say, and why am I not allowed to say that? Question mark. Anyway, so long as dissent is not suppressed, there will always be some who will query or ask, or question the ideas ruling their contemporaries and put new ideas to the test of argument and propaganda. That's scientific method. This interaction of individuals possessing different knowledge and different views is what constitutes the life of thought. So let's make a real important distinction here. Different knowledge and different views is not the same as my truth and your truth. Different knowledge is Isaac Newton saying, I observed this thing, and here's what I'm saying. Another person saying, well, I don't know if I've observed that. Tell me about it. So different knowledge is not, well, I think up is down. And the other person saying, well, I think down is up. That's not different knowledge or different perspectives. This is just what he's talking about here is literally the scientific method and how you use, like you said, that puzzle of different viewpoints to conform to reality. It's not my truth, your truth. And what Hayek is getting at here is that the ability to just any idea can be argued by anyone. That's the life of thought. That's the marketplace of ideas in its truest form, right? Which is not what we live in currently. But that's an important distinction to make. So
yeah. I think here, he highlights the idea of this intellectual freedom. It's essential, but as he stated in this quote here and before, it's essential not because everyone utilizes it. We see that people freely choose not to use intellectual freedom, which is a freedom in itself. You can say like, all right, it's not for me, independent thought, not for me. I'm just going to stick over here with the group thing.
Hard pass.
Yeah. Right. But because it allows any idea to be argued by someone, it's like there's a good idea out there somewhere and you got to find it. Right. Like the truth is out there and you just got to find it. You got to spend time finding it, and not allowing intellectual freedom just doesn't allow people to find that good idea, to find the truth that is out there. And, suppressing that, again, you could argue again that our intellectual freedom is a prerequisite to all other freedoms. If you can't think for yourself, you can't think independently, well, then all your other freedoms, right, as it's probably going to be redefined, are completely useless to you, right? So I think it's important to establish that you must be able to think independently. And if people are starting to control your thoughts, like you said, the guy said, if I don't know what happened during the election, but the fact that I'm not able to question it publicly is a problem. The fact that we can't think out loud or even getting to the point where we can't even think in our own houses because, people are going to be, you're afraid to offend someone who could, do whatever, getting to the point where you could probably get reported for some stuff for wrong think. I think we're heading in that direction.
Did you see what happened in Australia?
Everything. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. I think so. On a little side topic, I think Afghanistan is sort of fortunate for the mainstream media because it gets 100%. To not allow them to not talk about what's happening in Australia.
It gets them to not they wouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
Although CNN did cover it, and they're like, on Australia's highest peak of COVID-19, look at all these. So even then, their coverage is skewed. And they gave equal coverage to, of course, the riots last summer and then the post-election victory parties in the streets. But they covered them the exact same, totally unbiased. But no, you said anyone could turn someone in about the guy who his wife. This is in West Australia. The guy who his wife said that he had some kind of breakdown because he didn't agree with her about the severity of COVID for his kids, and the police came and arrested him and took him to basically a mental ward. And he made a video of it. My friend in West Australia, I kid you not, she goes, that's right down the street from where I live. That's where she got her vaccination shots at. So she's like, oh my gosh, that's literally right over there. But he's like, I thought my loving wife of 15 years, but because he had expressed any doubt, he's like, I'm just not sure about some of these measures and some of this stuff. That was enough. She turned him into the authorities and the police come and get him. And so he posted a few videos the night that he got brought in there, and he's like, I'm going to meet with a lawyer tomorrow, And then it went radio silent. He's like, he relayed this information to someone else. And he's like, the lawyer told me I need to keep a lot of this on the DL because I'm trying to get custody of my kids. Afterwards, I can talk about it. But yeah, I mean, that's serious crap, man. That's serious.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, you have that with COVID. I think you have that a lot with, the transgender and kids that you're not allowed to, to tell your kids, maybe this isn't the right option for you, or maybe you should wait and be able to experience a bit more things before you make this drastic decision, before your
Right.
brains even properly fused together. So it is happening in some capacity here already. And
100%.
that's
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying, that you can't have control over
And
kids.
evil.
Yeah.
And evil,
Oh,
in my
evil
opinion.
for sure. You can't have control over kids. You can't have control over your own body. And now you can't have control over your own thoughts. So this is the terrifying world that Hayek was warning us about. But of course, America, Australia, they could never turn into Nazi Germany, right?
Yeah.
So we have this last quote here, and I actually, I really like this one because it hits on a topic that I don't know. I don't think he hits on for the rest of the book, but I think it's an important little note here about humility and hubris. So the quote is, quote, "The tragedy of collectivist thought is that while it starts out to make reason supreme, it ends by destroying reason because it misconceives the process on which the growth of reason depends. It may indeed be said that it is the paradox of all collectivist doctrine that its demand for conscious control or conscious planning, that they necessarily lead to the demand that the mind of some individual should rule supreme, while only the individualist approach to social phenomena makes us recognize the super individual forces which guide the growth of reason. Individualism is thus an attitude of humility before the social process and of tolerance to other opinions, and is the exact opposite of the intellectual hubris, which is at root of the demand for comprehensive direction of the social process." So I think, he starts out here that the problem with the reason, well, he doesn't say this is my opinion here, and this is how I mostly argue against the Ayn Rand objectivists, is the problem with the reason is you can literally reason yourself into anything and any position, and even into positions that end up destroying reason itself. In order to maintain our reasoning capacity, we must bring a humble attitude to the floor and recognize that we could be wrong in our assumptions and positions. That's how you maintain reason, is by saying, I might be wrong here. And it's this intellectual hubris that makes us believe that we can power through whatever obstacle lies between us and our end goals. And we abandon reason when we take that route, when we believe we can just power through those obstacles. And we hurt a lot of people when we go down that road. And Nazi Germany is just one big, although relatively small compared to, China thereafter, and even the Soviet Union, of how many people get hurt when you go down that road. And I think Hayek identifies something real important here, that, when we show humility, when we act as if we're trying to find truth instead of fitting something into this box that we've already referred to it today as my truth, we can start heading down the road to serfdom. We can start going down these really, really bad paths, but we can quickly identify our faults and our mistakes and our capacity for evil, and make sure we take the next exit off the road to serfdom, to the road to liberty, and course correct before any heads start to roll. So I think having that humility, having that one, respect for the people who kind of built this stuff before you, and understanding, okay, I have this relatively liberal platform because of what all these people did, thought, and sacrificed for me to get here. I'm going to respect them and understand why we're here. And then when I take something and I find that there's some problems, I'm making mistakes, it seems like this, is heading off the rails. It seems like people with this plan that I have that is going to help people is starting to hurt people. I need to have the humility to admit that I might be wrong. And it's the problem with
that's being subject to truth, though, yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. But I mean, you have to understand that if there are obstacles between you and your end goals, maybe those obstacles are there for a reason. Identify those reasons, and then you can course correct to a better system. Hopefully, it's the people who don't have that, what he calls intellectual hubris, that says, I'm staying on the path. I got to power through. You got to break a couple eggs to make an omelet, right? And that's the way they view this: is the ends justify the means, and they don't worry about all the heads. Again, the heads literally will roll along the way to get to their end goals, because they don't have that humility.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to the Jurassic Park quote that we gave last time. Do you want to read that? Let's read that. Let's go back and read that. Yeah. Almost there. All right, here we go. Yeah. The lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me. Don't you see the danger inherent in what you're doing here? You have a power that is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun. If I may, I'll tell you the problem with the power you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could that you didn't stop to think if you should. And that's a little bit of a distillation of the total quote by Ian Malcolm there. But the point is that the lack of humility is what drives this ideology. I was trying to find, of course, I searched for Keynes quote, "We believe in our own" on Google, and it's bringing me up. It's like the list of the most inspirational quotes by John Maynard Keynes. And I was trying to find the one that Soul references in Knowledge and Decisions, where John Maynard Keynes was basically like, we believed in our own, the sufficiency of our own goodness. Essentially, that's not the quote, but that's the general gist of it. Is we believe in the sufficiency of our own goals and our own instincts, and that was enough. We didn't need anything else. We literally were willing to reject all of human history and say, well, we think we're right, and we're good with that. And just the hubris there. And these are the people that are building this giant machine. These are the ones forging the ring and going, yeah, it's fine. Nothing will go wrong. Nothing will go wrong. And like you said, heads will start rolling.
Yeah. So when you get to control,
it's the only place it'll go.
Yeah, but when you control all the avenues of information, stuff can go wrong, and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
So it's power reinforcing power. And allowing them to really maintain it because one, they believe they can, they believe they ought to, and two, so many people are willing to go along with it. I think we could really dive a lot more into how this power keeps growing because of the institutions that are supposed to hold them to account, right? The mainstream media, the free press that we have, so-called, is supposed to be holding the powerful to account and making sure
or the state. Yeah, that's what
they're staying above board, and they don't do that anymore. And there's a lot of reasons as to why they don't do that anymore.
On purpose. Exactly. There actively, is a very specific rationale behind that. 100%.
Yeah. And I think that's something we'd have to break down for another day. But to not have any humility going into this and being able to just truck through and not worry about the bodies along the way. That is how you repeat the mistakes of the 20th century, even though they're history book. We understand how this happened. Hayek lays the case out here really well. I'm sure plenty of people have also done that. And there's people warning us. We have immigrants from Cuba warning us, like this stuff is happening. We have Sumi Park warning us from North Korea, saying, I'm getting the feeling, at my university, the same feeling I had, in North Korea. So the people are here to tell us. The canaries are keeling over, if you will, warning us that we are headed down this road that we ought not to head down if we want to keep and to conserve, our liberal founding. But not enough people right now seem to have noticed that the canaries are dead.
And also just think about the hubris required to say, I can distort information. There's no consequences to me just only filtering through the information I want people to hear, and that the ends justify the means, including in the distribution of truth, of facts. There are people getting banned off of Twitter. I swear to God, people are going to be like, if this is the first episode they're watching, going to be like, so there's a sane guy and some crazy asshole. But it's like people were getting banned off of Twitter for saying, it seems like these vaccines aren't working as we were promised. It's like, that's objectively true. The New York Times is literally running pieces about how, people are worried about the efficacy of these things as these breakthrough cases are emerging. About Israel was the model because everyone's vaccinated. Now they have the biggest surge in cases around the world. And people were worried about how they're not working as we thought. But if you say that, and you're not the New York Times and you say that on Twitter, then you'll get banned for a week for misinformation. And it's like, that's crazy. So the hubris required to be like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. The plan, tunnel vision, the plan, is, as Ian Malcolm says, it staggers me, absolutely staggers me for people to think there's no consequences, or even to not even go that far to think there will be no consequences, because that infers that they thought about the possibility of them being there, and then they just drew the conclusion they won't be. That's not the same as someone saying, I'm not even interested in whether or not they exist. And that's where I think a lot of these people are. So we can do our summary here of the chapter, if it's even possible. So the chapter 11, the chapter about the morally and intellectually bankrupt nature of collectivism, particularly when it comes to the distribution, or not even the distribution, it's the adherence to truth, the submission to truth. And a lot of that is just like, we have to be submissive to it. James Lindsay wrote a book called Everybody's Wrong About God, I think in 2015 is when it was published. Notion that I think is something I've thought about before even hearing about the summary of it, but where it's like, he's like, the way for a person to incorporate religious worldview, even if they're an atheist, is to substitute the concept of God for truth. And it's like, look, I'm going to submit to whatever's true, regardless of my feelings about it. And he's like, this is how believers, how Christians or whatever religious people view their relationship with God. It's like, look, I'm ultimately submissive to this, regardless of how I feel about it. That's what I have to be subservient to, is reality. And I think that's true. And so that's what Hayek's writing about here, is these people who will be interested in that. They're actually completely willing to kill it and pervert that. So the first part, competing propaganda is not the same as hegemonic propaganda. It's not just about being lied to. People also have to be isolated from truth. So competing information, competing, even if it's propaganda, Coke or Pepsi, take the Pepsi challenge, whatever. Anything that falls under the rubric of you are getting a different perspective than the one we want you to hold, that can't be allowed, right? People, I read a book once to get in on their religious vein once more. They said that we often consider original sin being Adam and Eve in the garden, but actually sin entered the world once a perspective or a view or a will outside the one that God holds existed. So he said, actually, original sin can be attributed to Lucifer. The minute Lucifer had a will or a thought or, a desire, those outs that deviated from the will of God, that's when sin entered, and so a sinless existence is one in which only God's will is what exists. These people hold that same view. Whether or not you think the Bible is real or bunk or whatever, that's fine. But the biblical worldview is the will of God is the only one that's acceptable. If, the safest place I think this is a quote from maybe Jonathan Edwards or Spurgeon, but the safest place to be is smack dab in the middle of the will of God. And so these people have the same worldview as the God of the Bible. The only place to be is smack dab in the middle of our plan, in the will of our plan. Anything outside of that is sin, is missing the mark. And so we want to create this hegemony of propaganda. It's not just that we want to lie to you. It's not just that we want to push our worldview and our will on you, but it's also that we want to make sure that you're not exposed to any other possibility. There's not going to be, anything else here, because that might get you to consider something outside of the supremacy and the perfection of our plan. So it's not just about being lied to, it's about being isolated from the truth. And again, what's the definition of hegemony? Ask yourself why NBC, NPR, CNN, ABC, Washington Post, New York Times, Huffington Post, Vox, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the CDC, the FDA, all these institutions all agree with each other. And that's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. They all agree with each other. You can't have an outside perspective.
Yeah. So the second point that we wanted to highlight here is the development of the moral code, which is established by a totalitarian regime to kind of build these new moral standards that must appeal to us. They have to appeal to the population because they have to believe it's theirs, right? So these new standards must seem like they're standards that were held or ought to have been held this whole time. Again, it's telling Christians that Jesus was a socialist, hippie, pacifist, and that, this new idea of socialism to them has actually been a belief that they've held in their hearts the whole time. They just didn't know about it, right? So what they do is they're destructive of all moral views because they undermine one of the foundations of all morals, which is the sense of and the respect for truth. Like you said before, once you get rid of that, then moral codes effectively really don't matter. But again, like we said before, truth is this measuring stick of where you're at in morality. Once you get rid of truth, once you get rid of reality itself, moral systems are truly irrelevant.
Yep. Yeah, because it's all based on whatever truth or whatever ethical code, moral code the planner gives to you. Our system of information must be corrupted to silence dissent, kind of in the vein of what you just talked about. The probable effect, and this is, think about what is the hierarchy of values of these institutions? What's the hierarchy of values of the New York Times or the CDC these days? God, it scares the shit out of me. The probable effect of the people's loyalty to the system becomes the only criterion. I would say it becomes the first criterion for deciding whether a particular piece of information is to be disseminated or suppressed. So if you have a hierarchy of values of this system, it's like at the top is, does it support the plan or not? That's the first criterion. And then after that is everything else. So if it does support the plan, then they'll put it out there. Think about, again, back to Jon Stewart with the lab leak stuff. No, it doesn't contradict anything now. There's no harm to our plan or to the narrative to put it out there. So now I can talk about this thing that I've known for a year, but now I can. And so the point is, and I did a thread about this on Twitter yesterday, where it's like the hierarchy of values of these institutions is the legitimation and maintenance of their power and their supremacy. That's the first thing that matters. And then after that is whatever that institution was originally created for. Yep. And so if, and the example I gave, because I made this thread in the context of a buddy texted me and he's like, CNN is turning on Biden. What's going on? I'm like, no. And one of the examples I gave my friends, I was like, okay, think about it like this. You know how sometimes in movies where the bad guy and the good guy team up, the bad guy might help the good guy temporarily. We were talking about the dumbass Resident Evil movies the other night. And, I think at the end of the fifth one, like Wesker is like, yeah, and just wanting to help out. Yeah. The bad guy didn't become good. It's just that his interests temporarily aligned in that specific instance with helping the good guy. He didn't become good. So whenever we see these institutions doing things, we're like, well, maybe they're doing what they're supposed to do. No, they're doing what they're supposed to do in that moment because it either aligns with their goal or it doesn't conflict with their goal. And so that's why. But either way, the point is that the hierarchy of values, once these institutions are infected by this ideology of collectivism, as Hayek outlines here, once they're infected with that, all that matters is, does it support the plan or not? That's it. And then after that, it's like, well, if there's no conflict here, then we can talk about it. But what's missing from that is truth is not the thing. Moral virtue or value is not the thing, as we've traditionally understood it. Yeah. So that's a big problem. That's a big problem.
I think we're distilled. We have four bullet points here, and the fourth one just dives into those institutions we're talking about, but we probably could have one here, and it's just the end of truth, right? Because it all relates back to that. That's the most critical feature here. But the fourth bullet point we have is the foundations, institutions, what you're talking about: science, history, law, education must be redirected to serve the purposes of the plan. Right? We talk about all these German cats. Like you find German cats in all of these because they're no longer. It's not about science. It's about the appropriate science according to the plan. It's not about history. It's about the history that we want to highlight, and you a little bit of revisionist play in there to fit the plan. It's the law. It's the critical theory version of the law. It's education. It's this type of education, the hegemonic education that builds activists for the plan, instead of helping kids become adults prepared for the real world, for an actual reality that they're going to inherit. And none of these things, science, history, law, education, none of these have the original essence or their original purpose anymore. None of these are
Marxist Leninist, theory and surgery.
Yeah. It's all there to serve the plan. I know you have the German word here, Gleichstellung. How do you say it?
Gleichstellung.
I was basically right there. Everything must be the same. Everything fits for the same purpose. It's all organized and coordinated in a certain way to make sure that it all serves the plan in the end. And to do that, you have to get rid of truth in order to do that successfully.
Yep. And again, truth being one of the bedrock, vital, foundational aspects of morality and a just society. You have to get rid of truth. So another way to frame that is to say truth and morality, objective truth, right? And morality, as we understand it, is in direct conflict with what these people are wanting to do, right?
Yep.
That is terrifying. That they are openly admitting that. I think we were talking about this the other night, where it might have been me talking to Bentham, I don't know, but it might have been you and I, but where I mentioned about how you don't need, I think this is you and I, how you don't need convincing when it comes to reality. People aren't constantly in your face when it comes to reality. Like, don't forget, gravity exists. Don't forget, the New York Times, gravity still exists. Gravity's out there, guys. You don't need a full court press, intellectually, whenever it comes to your senses, whenever it comes to reality. You don't need to be constantly reminded of reality. It's just there. Reality doesn't require maintenance, is the other way I would say that, is that outside of things that are maybe new discoveries, for example, like, hey, this berry's poisonous, something like that. Like, outside of that, reality doesn't require maintenance. Like, we just conform to it naturally. But if there's this constant upkeep of something, it's like, okay, why? What's going on here? And that's what planning does. It's this constant upkeep of the narrative, the plan, because that plan and that narrative is often in total contradiction of reality and morals and what is actually morally good. That's why they have to have this new sensibility, this new reality, this new freedom. I think that's earlier in the chapter when he says, the new freedom is actually the freedom of the majority to impose their will on the individual. We have to have these new things, right? And reality doesn't require persuasion. It just, you conform to it because it just is, right? So there's no CNN headline, fire still hot.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's no NPR headline saying gravity exists, but there is probably an NPR headline that says gravity's racist.
That's right. Yeah. New study raises doubts about the racial neutrality of gravity. Right.
Does not allow white men to jump as high.
Terry Gross, I'm sure, had a very riveting piece about it. NPR and Bernie Sanders are the two things that I get the most pissed off at, and a lot of that is because I'm like, I can't believe I thought you sons of bitches knew what you're talking about. The third one might be Robert Reich. I used to think his documentary Inequality for All was like brilliant, but this is again back in my time when I thought roads were socialism, so that reminder of, and that's the reality part where I'm like, okay, now that I understand reality and I look back at the views I used to have, then I'm like, holy shit, those are so out of the realm of reality, and it really, it's like, I cannot believe that I was able to exist that far removed from truth. But that's what this thing does. That's the glacial tongue. We're all swimming in the same in this case, red sauce. That's what Chris Rufo is. It's not a whitewashing of history. It's a red washing of history. I think that's a brilliant observation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at it on the bright side. At least you weren't 15, still believed in Santa, right?
I suppose that's true. I'd almost rather that be the case.
Yeah,
You know?
right. I'll take Santa any day.
There's not genocidal implications of that, to my knowledge.
True that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know this is going to be a bit longer than most of them.
We still have 2 pages left, man.
Ooh, let's do it. I think, yeah, it's going to be all the twist joke.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, this one's going to be a little bit longer, and also it's probably going to release a little bit later on Monday. We're recording this very, very late on a Sunday, so you know, to process this stuff and get it out there to you guys, it's going to take a bit more time, but should be out on Monday. Should be proper.
What? One more time.
Yes.
Why is it so important that we're okay? It's like, okay, this is going to be maybe 3 parts, whatever. This chapter, again, you can tell me if you disagree or not, maps onto our current reality so cleanly, and it lays bare the nature of what we're looking at whenever it comes to these that we're encountering and going, what is going on here? And Hayek gives that articulation that I mentioned at the beginning, where it's like, let me put words to what you're seeing. Yeah. Fleshel tongue, bro. You know,
it's like
and so this is vital to understand.
Well, it's like the previous chapter, why the worst get on top. It's all something we know. It's all something we see, the worst get on top, but we don't always put it together in our heads why that happens.
Yep.
This chapter, just like, you know, we mentioned at the beginning, you know, when truth is hidden from you, you have no baseline to establish, you know, a relative truth compared to what objective truth is. And that's why it's hard to see when truth gets taken away. It's not easy to identify. They wouldn't have to make a full, you know, ironically, I think this is the shortest chapter in the book, but it was the most intense. But the reason that's important, the reason that we felt the need to expand on it, is it's not as obvious as, you know, you think it is. You know, you think, you know, it's not always easy to tell when someone's lying. Well, imagine that you don't only walk into, you know, a place where one person's lying, you walk into a place where literally everyone's lying. The signs are lying, you know, everything is wrong and upside down. That is the reality that we're inheriting today.
It's maddening. Yeah.
And then once you start to recognize, you know, everything that is so untrue, and these screens that keep out inconvenient truths, but allow in some of the, you know, stuff that reinforce narratives, it makes you a little paranoid. It makes you think that, you know, you're a conspiracy theorist because you're going so against the grain. You think you're going so against the grain until you realize, oh, there's actually a large community of people that actually understand that, you know, these institutions that are supposed to be providing this truth, helping find truth, are doing the exact opposite now. And then we need to find a way to
totally
correct before, you know, we lose everything.
There's, I mean, 2 things there. I mean, we're already over on time, so whatever. But one, think about Yeonmi Park describing what North Korea was like. That's why I mentioned that earlier, where it's like, if you don't think this is sustainable, think again. She said that she didn't even have a connection to the value of human life until her first kid was born, because they were taught their lives don't matter. Love, there was no concept of love or anything like that.
The most horrifying thing to her that came out the interview, especially Jordan Peterson, is that she didn't feel anything when people around her died.
Yep.
Like her father dying. She didn't feel bad because her father died. She felt bad because she didn't feel anything. And that's built into you through social conditioning.
Yeah. The fact that is so doable, you know, that they can do it by, if you cut people off so efficiently from truth. And that's where, like you said, it's, you know, you said you feel crazy, you know, and it's maddening to go, wait a second. There's this great collection of little shorts called The Animatrix that came out maybe in 2008, 2007, something like that. No, it was before that. It was maybe 3 or 2 actually. And one of the themes of that, I think that this is in one of the stories, is that whenever people start to become aware of the matrix, and especially if they become sufficiently convinced that things are not right, they will self awaken from the matrix. And it's a huge shock to their body. A lot of times they'll die because it's so completely jarring to their sensibilities. And there's a lot there. I mean, Carlin and I have talked about this, coming from the left of it takes years. It took me years to go, okay, wait a second. What? Oh, wait. My view on this was that, oh my gosh, and getting those alternative perspectives. And it is absolutely, I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I don't even remember what I was thinking about it. It might have been, I was thinking about talking to my brother about something, and how, like, once you get into these concepts, like, it's one thing to be like, okay, NPR also sucks. But once you get into the concepts of like the cathedral and how a lot of these things work, and just how like bad the situation is, it is, you just can't start out there with people. You just can't, because it's so like, I had a buddy, the very first episode that I ever did on YouTube or on anywhere was originally going to be me and a friend, actually, who was getting into the stuff and thinking about it. And he was listening to, it was when 12 Rules came out, and, he was in Jordan Peterson and stuff. And we record. So the first episode I did on guns and everything, I actually I don't think I have it still, but there's a recording of that, of me and my friend actually talking about those things. And afterwards, he was like, okay, I don't think I actually want to do that. And then I remember a while later, maybe, I don't think it was quite a year. It might've been a year, talking to him, and he was like, I quit paying attention to that stuff. It's just easier. I'm happier now. And he had completely like been like, he had started to go down the road of like, okay, something's fucked. And then he was like, yeah, this is stressful, and just punched out and said, I'm not. And then, I want to say, and by the way, this is one of the smartest people I know. I want to say this is maybe a month or two ago. I was talking to him about vaccine mandates and passports. And he was like, why would that be a big deal? So it was just full circle, just completely full circle.
Well, who's the character in the Matrix? Is his name Cypher, the guy who wants
Cypher was
to,
yeah. Cypher was the one at the
wants-
beginning who was like, this steak tastes delicious. Yeah.
but he's the one who wants to go back in the Matrix. He wants to.
Yeah, he wants to forget.
Back, but yeah, he wants to not even remember the realization that there is a Matrix. He wants to be ignorant. Like, he voluntarily wants to be ignorant because he believes he'll be happier that way. So that's literally the perfect parallel, I think, for that.
100%. And that's my buddy. Again, one of the smartest people I know, hands down. One of the reasons why we even connected in high school, this is one of my oldest friends also, was over, it was a small rural town. It doesn't take much to find another person who can, at least have a little bit higher level of thinking about stuff. And so, but he started to go down that, but it's that jarring, is my point, is it is that. And so that's one of the things that makes us, back to the Brandolini's law thing. It's not just about the information itself, but it's the people, right? Like, you have to have an order of magnitude more of people who understand this stuff a lot of times to combat even just one person who is just, and advocating, how many sane people do you need to counteract the consequences of Brian Stelter, right? How many Dan Crenshaws do you need? And I'm not even saying Dan Crenshaw is that great, but I would say he's at least 7 out of 10. How many Dan Crenshaws do you need to counteract one Maxine Waters? Good God. Right? How many Ron DeSantis's do you need to counteract one, what's her, Gretchen Whitmer, or Andrew Cuomo?
It says you're cutting out a little bit, and I thought you were going to say Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, how many Ron DeSantis do you need to counteract one Greta? I think it's actually Thunberg, because words, and I don't give a shit about that girl's name. Anyway, go to school. But it's an overwhelming problem, but you have to at least start with an understanding of the problem. That's one of the things I love about Hayek, is that you can't solve a problem. You can't even attack a problem if you don't understand the nature of it.
Yep.
And he's at least helping people understand the nature of the problem. And that's one of the things we talked about here today, hopefully. So sorry, I know we were starting to wrap up and then kind of went down that rabbit hole, but.
No, all good stuff. Well, this would be the end of chapter 11. Chapter
11.
12, I don't remember the name of
it's
it.
the roots of the socialistic roots of Nazism, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah, so there seems to be a couple of chapters here where he gets in the very specifics on certain things, but
the one after that, the Totalitarians Among Us, I believe is what it's called, is pretty great too.
Yeah, but we're gonna try to keep it going every Monday. It's gonna be now 4 left after chapter 11, so we're gonna be excited to wrap it up, and then we'll see what we'll do for the big finale. But I still haven't counted the hours we've invested into this, or at least it's just recorded time. But all I can say is if you just listen to the audiobook, it'll be about like a fifth of the length. But
easily.
Yeah. So we try to do the best we can at bringing our own highbrow intellectual content to the book. So
fucking losers.
Yeah, you'll get that joke if you listen to our live stream.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. But yeah, man,
a lot of letters. He was one of the people in the live chat, by the way. He actually
I think so. Yeah. I saw the first series of letters are the same, but I don't think it was the exact same handle.
Yeah.
But that guy actually, yeah. So I think it might have been. But the reason we got to see that guy and the reason that we saw that comment is because he is in locals. So he's want to comment on one of our stuff, and that's the best way to get this podcast, all of our other written and video and podcast work, and just join our community. So make sure to join Truman at the Return to Reason community at returntoreason.locals.com. Also, obviously, you can find them on YouTube. Might be watching it here. Just search Return to Reason. You can search them on ThinkSpot, Return to Reason, and also on Medium at Return to Reason for the written content. And go on Twitter and follow them at My Mundane Mind. There we go. At My Mundane Mind. I know I was almost going to give Deb Villman's handle there. It's got reason in it. Come on.
I made an insomnia.
Yes. It's an awesome name. Free plug for Deb there.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and same for Kevin. Go to engineeringpolitics.locals.com, ENG_politics on Twitter. And Medium, again, he's kind of like me, where the name is going to be at all those places. Engineering Politics, Medium. He actually updates his ThinkSpot, unlike me. He updates his Grindr, unlike me. And so find him on all of those places. That's right.
My location is always on.
That's correct. 24/7. And YouTube as well. Oh my God. And so, yeah. But find him on YouTube and Twitter, especially because he's criminally under subbed on both of those places. You broke 100 on Twitter. I noticed that the other day. I don't know if that's
Twitter. I've been way over 100 for a while.
Maybe it was YouTube. You broke 100 on the other day. Okay. Yeah. So good job. So get him up to 200, folks, by the way, and then 3 after that.
I'm rolling in the dough in those YouTube dollars.
That's right. The YouTube bucks. So that's it. Thank you everyone for watching. Like, share, subscribe. If you find this valuable, please especially do that. Leave your comments, questions, critiques. Of course, don't do the critiques. We're not interested in truth here, just what supports the narrative. And that is it. We will
give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Grindr, everywhere you can find us.
Yeah. That's right. 25/8. So, all right. We'll check you next time. Peace.